Suddenly, the ground gives way beneath him, and 18 illusory tigers attack. How does a useless lord see through the magic and obliterate them all? To understand how he got here, let's go back to the beginning. Heavy rain pours over the Crimson Fortress as a baby's fate is sealed. In his crib, little Vinchen sleeps, unaware his life will be a living hell. Patriarch stares at his own son with a contempt sharper than any blade. The baby simply breathes, oblivious to the cruelty of the man who should protect him. A disgusting thing was born, he declares, turning the birth into a sentence of absolute scorn. The maids look at the mother, but the atmosphere in the room is one of pure tragedy. The child's innocent face softens no one's heart in that cold room. His mother holds him in her arms, but her eyes are filled with profound sorrow. She looks at her son and whispers, "If only you were like Cajun." The comparison begins even before the boy learns to properly open his eyes. The silence in the room is heavy, and Vinchen's fate seems already sealed. She goes to the extreme, asking, "Can't you just die, my baby?" But the child's spirit silently replies, "Mother, I'm sorry. I don't want to die." He heard everything, every word of rejection, ever since he was in her womb. In the past, the father looked at his wife's belly, placing all his hopes there. He needed this son to be better than his brothers, a tool for his ambition. Baby's cries echo through the halls, the first scream of a life marked by pain. Time passes, and the scene shifts to the sunny gardens of the Samian family. The maids surround little Kajin, calling him an angel as he smiles at everyone. Boy is the center of attention, the prodigy everyone loves and idolizes. His mother watches from afar and notes that Kajin started walking very early. She looks at Vinchen on the floor and complains, "Why is this child so slow?" While Vinchen could barely take his first step, the world was already demanding from him. By the time he finally walked, Kajin was already wielding a real sword. The gap between them only widened. Kajin was already training with mana and advanced swordsmanship. "Oh, if only my son were Kajin," she would repeat, crushing her own son's soul. From then on, Kajin became the symbol of everything Vinchen desired and envied. At 7 years old, fate deals another blow, and Vinchen is sent into a carriage. He would be just another assistant, serving the whims of his talented cousin. Publicly, they said he was a friend to help, but the reality was grim. Davin's face, now that of a marked young man, shows the weariness of years of abuse. Kajin cackles as Davin is tied to a tree in the middle of the snow. "It's the first time I've seen a loser like you," he says before attacking. The whip cracks, and Kajin demands he cry more, unleashing all his rage on his cousin. Davin clenches his teeth and swallows his tears, refusing to give his tormentor that satisfaction. The adults merely watch and chuckle, ignoring the torture unfolding before them. The whip continues to cut through the air and skin in an endless cycle of pain. The scene shifts to the icy mountains where the brutal training takes place. Davin's uncle was an incredible man, but he abandoned the family and never returned. With no one to control Kajin, he grew into a merciless executioner. "Too slow!" Kajin screams, beating his cousin who tries to defend himself. Davin falls to his knees and admits defeat, but this does not stop the violence. His superior talent and the blessing of the sword god turned into poison in Kajin's hand. "Did you think it would end just because you gave up?" he asks before a brutal strike. He calls for the next one, treating the training like an animal slaughter. Davin is called again, his name echoing like an invitation to more suffering. Envy burns in Davin's chest as he sees his cousin's strength and talent. He screams internally that he also wants to be strong, that he also wants to win. Kajin notices the defiant gaze and orders him to stop staring at him like that. "I don't like you," he snaps, feeling threatened by Davin's resolve. He calls him a one-armed loser and is annoyed to be stared at by someone inferior. "Think you can beat me with effort? Then try." Kajin challenges, kicking Davin to the ground. He claims that someone like Davin can try their whole life and still never reach him. On the ground, taking a relentless beating, Davin can only think of one thing: to win. The desire for victory becomes an obsession that keeps him alive in that hell. He trains alone to exhaustion, breathing the cold forest air. While Kajin lives surrounded by luxury and women, Davin bleeds in the dark. Years pass, and the rivalry reaches a boiling point in a real combat. Davin advances with a look that says their positions won't be the same forever. They face each other in the courtyard, the tension between them almost palpable in the air. Every blow exchanged carries decades of resentment and accumulated pain. Kajin moves with arrogance, but realizes his cousin is no longer the same. He lets out a groan of pain as Davin finally manages to pierce his defense. The combat intensifies, and dust rises as blades clash. Damn, my vision, Kajin mutters, losing control of the fight. He is in shock, realizing the loser is about to surpass him. Davin doesn't hesitate, applying all the technique he refined through years of suffering. The shout of Kajin's name echoes through the arena as the final blow is struck. Silence falls over the crowd as the outcome becomes clear to all. The announcement shocks everyone. Davin, the one-armed man, defeated the sword genius Kajin. Until that moment, his official record was 21 consecutive defeats. At 29 years old, Davin finally achieved what seemed impossible. He ignored everyone who told him to give up and laughed at his lack of talent. Against all odds and the entire system, he finally won. The crowd screams his name, recognizing the new champion who emerged from nowhere. He stares at his fallen cousin and asks how long he thought he'd be glorious. "If I were you, I wouldn't have lived this way," Davin asserts with authority. He says he wouldn't have wasted his life on vices or trampled on the weak. A feeling of accomplishment fills him. He finally carved out his own space. Davin lowers his guard, thinking it's over, but Kajin still has one last trick. The crowd screams in horror as Kajin cowardly stabs his cousin in the back. "Dirty until the end, Kajin," Davin whispers as he feels life drain away. Kajin's face is distorted by a sickly rage and humiliation. The pain is terrible, but the rage of being betrayed like this hurts far more. "You will always be remembered as a loser," Davin says, even while fallen. The arena's hero now lies on the ground, surrounded by his own blood. He wakes up in a dark place and wonders if this is hell. A masked torturer laughs and asks if he really thinks he's dead. The man says he was lucky that Saint Raelsa was in the arena to heal him. Davin is in shock. A saint saved him only for him to be tortured? Raelsa used her miraculous power to keep Davin's broken body alive. He wonders if he only lived to suffer, as his body is utterly destroyed. The torturer asks if he made a contract with the demon to win. Davin cannot believe the absurd accusation he just heard. The executioner claims that only with demonic help could a loser defeat the genius Kajin. To make matters worse, he says Davin's own parents admitted their son's guilt. The image of his parents haunts him. They abandoned him to protect the family's status. They fabricated evidence of child sacrifices to incriminate him and save the Samion's honor. They say Kajin stabbed him to protect their honor and that he cried a lot about it. Davin realizes he defeated his cousin, but he would never defeat the family's corrupt system. The sentence is read. Davin will have his mana sealed and spend his life in prison, rot in hell for eternity, the torturer screams with sadistic pleasure. He is dragged away by the guards as if he were a mere sack of garbage. Thrown into a filthy cell, Davin reaches the rock bottom of human existence. The blindfold over his eyes hides the darkness that now inhabits his soul. The door opens, and Kajin himself appears to gloat over his defeated cousin. "You look quite good like this, Davin," he sneers, reveling in the sight. Kajin is now the Sword Emperor, praised by all as a diligent genius. He ironically thanks the loser for being the stepping stone to his ascension. Time passes, and Davin wastes away, feeling a hunger that gnaws at his gut. If he were to die, he wished it would be with honor, not in that wretched hole. The regret of not having died in the arena burns hotter than his wounds. The cold embrace of death begins to envelop him, and he feels the end is near. He wonders if life would have been different if he still had both arms, or if he had been part of the main lineage and possessed the blessing of the sword god. "I don't want to die," he murmurs, a desperate last wish for life. His consciousness begins to fade into the vastness of absolute void. Suddenly, a red eye opens in the darkness with an intense glow. Someone shouts the name Vinchen, and a hand grasps his arm tightly. He feels a sharp pain in his right arm, and is confused by the sensation. Davin wonders if it's a dream, as everything feels too real to be an illusion. He recognizes the man in front of him as someone from one of the family's offshoots. He realizes they called him Vinchen, the seventh son of the prestigious Adenka family. The air is fresh and lacks the musty scent of that terrible underground prison. Having a right arm feels like a divine gift, bestowed moments before death. The man complains about being ignored and tries to use mana to harm him. Instinctively, Davin knows exactly how to block that kind of amateur attack. All he needs to do is physically separate himself from the opponent to break the flow of the enemy's technique. The man flies backward, and Davin finds it strange how someone with so much mana could be so slow. With a sarcastic tone, he apologizes and says his hand slipped. He glares at the man on the ground with a disdain that stems from another life. The man becomes furious with the impudent brat who dared to retaliate. He snarls that being from the main family doesn't give him the right to act like this. He promises that his own son will crush Vinchen without mercy in the future. Davin realizes this man is just like his former father, obsessed with power. He projected his own failed dreams onto his son, creating an unhappy child. The man leaves the room, swearing he won't forget such disrespect. He tells Vinchen to wait for the day of the assembly of true swords. Now alone, Davin tries to process the new reality he finds himself in. He lets out a sigh of relief, no longer in that dark cell. He sits down and reflects that if this were a dream, he should have woken up by now. Memories of the new body begin to surface like flashes of a sad life. Vinchen's mother died in childbirth, and he grew up without any maternal affection. His father never cared for him, seeing him only as a walking failure. The other children in the family used him as a punching bag and scapegoat. He was a coward who cried in his room after getting beaten even by his younger sister. An abandoned ugly duckling, an easy target for anyone wanting to climb the social ladder. The one-armed Davin is now the useless Vinchen in a bizarre process of reincarnation. None of this makes sense, but he is alive and has a healthy body. He finds a diary and begins to read the desperate accounts of its former owner. The pages are filled with self-loathing and constant desires for death. The boy had rock-bottom self-esteem and had already given up fighting for his life. It seems God answered our prayers, kid, Davin thinks with renewed determination. One wanted to live, and the other wanted to die, and the exchange seems to have been made. Suddenly, he realizes he's not alone in the room and shouts for whoever is there. A voice calls him naive, and he wonders if it's a demon deceiving him. He questions if the voice belongs to the original owner of the body, the true Vinchen. The entity introduces itself as Julian, the former Vinchen who now has no name. Davin asks how he's still here, if he should have died for the exchange to occur. Julian talks about a revelation, a concept Davin only knows from ancient legends. Revelations are divine gifts given to humans blessed from birth by gods. He begins to suspect who that floating being in front of him truly is. When asked if he's a god, Julian confirms, but says he's just a lesser god. He admits his spiritual energy is low and that he needs help to ascend. Julian intended to summon a spiritual god, but Davin ended up crawling in. To become a true god, he needs to achieve various accomplishments and epic feats. They call this vocation, the necessary path to achieve full divinity. Davin makes it clear he has no interest in other people's goals and achievements. He says he now has a new life and will be too busy to listen to ghosts. Julian takes the comment as a threat, and the atmosphere in the room grows tense. Davin feels the new body is too healthy for a premature death. He prepares for whatever this lesser god is planning to do now. "You bastard," Vinchen murmurs, feeling the spiritual pressure in the room intensify. He falls to the floor as Julian floats above him with an enigmatic smile on his face. The god comments on how naive he is to think he can dictate the rules so early. Julian states that from now on, he will show him something that will change everything. Real memories begin to flood Davin's mind in a visual storm. A bolt of energy strikes Vinchen's chest, dragging his consciousness into the past. He feels the weight of each memory and wonders if those images are real. Vinchen sees himself on the ground, being beaten by cowards who demand to kick him even harder. But his gaze amidst the blood frightens the aggressors. There was no fear there. Vinchen realizes that the body's previous owner was merely faking cowardice while preparing his revenge. He is shocked to see that a 13-year-old child had such dark and calculating thoughts. Julian smiles macabrely and asks if his acting wasn't impeccable. He reveals that he needed to escape his family's surveillance to study apostle-level subjects. Now, sitting at his desk, Vinchen asks if the spirit is finally willing to listen to him. He nods, ready to delve into the story the world forgot. Vinchen stares at Julian and asks the question, "Do you know the great demon Davin and the hero King Kajin?" Julian freezes in midair, caught off guard by the weight of those legendary names. The boy shouts the names in disbelief, not understanding how Vinchen knows about figures from so long ago. He explains that this is a tragedy that happened exactly 500 years ago. The image of Davin, the one-armed swordsman, emerges escaping from Samian prison amidst the chaos. The books say he massacred over 10,000 people in his desperate escape. Because of this trail of blood, history forever recorded him as a cruel demon. Vinchen feels the ground give way. He realizes he traveled half a millennium into the future. The chances of a Davin and a Kajin existing in the same Samian lineage would be impossible unless he is absolutely certain he died in that filthy cell 5 centuries ago. Julian recounts that the Samian family abandoned the one-armed man and chose the wielder of the storm sword. That traitor grew in power and became the legendary Sword Emperor. Vinchen grinds his teeth in hatred, realizing that the entire story was fabricated with terrible lies. He punches the table, shouting against the damned bastards of the Samian family who tarnished his honor. Julian, laughing at the situation, says that Kajin loved Davin like a brother, and that it was very romantic. Vinchen loses his patience and tells the spirit to stop spouting that meaningless trash. Julian asks why so much anger, and Vinchen explodes, saying that everything he knows is a lie. The spirit approaches with shining eyes and asks if he truly lived in that era. Vinchen confirms, warning that history is only the version told by the victors. Julian laughs and comments that kids these days grow up too fast to talk like that. The young man sighs deeply and orders the ghost to continue his account of the future. Julian describes how the Hero King allied with the Solar Sword Emperor to defeat the demon. Vinchen freezes upon hearing that name, and Julian explains that Arslan was the ancestor of the Adenka family. He starts laughing, remembering that the snot-nosed kid he trained became a patriarch. Vinchen sees himself in the past, meeting little Arslan who deeply admired him. The boy swore he wanted to be strong like him when he finally grew up. Davin remembers that, even with one arm, he taught everything he knew to that dedicated disciple. Arslan visited him in prison and promised that authority would never conquer truth. With tears in his eyes, the boy swore he would restore his master's honor, no matter the cost. But Vinchen bitterly recalls that after that promise, Arslan never returned. Julian reveals that the patriarch left a life's mission for all his descendants. The sacred objective of the Adenka family is one, to surpass the powerful Samian family. And most importantly, Vinchen needs to face the truth head-on. He realizes it wasn't a coincidence. Arslan genuinely tried to clear his master's name. Although he doesn't know everything, Vinchen is now absolutely certain of his new path. Arslan abandoned his own name to create the Adenka family solely to confront the Samians' lies. Vinchen feels destiny weigh on his shoulders for having been reborn into this very family. He asks Julian if, by completing this mission, the spirit will truly become a god. Julian confirms and proposes an agreement where Vinchen becomes the definitive owner of this body. He grips the sword hilt and thanks his old disciple Arslan in his thoughts. Vinchen draws his steel and swears he will inherit the mission and surpass the Samians. He will rise to the top and crush the family that betrayed him, using the Adenka name. The two walk through the mansion corridors, the sound of their footsteps echoing like a drum. Julian floats behind him and mockingly asks where the old man is going now. Vinchen stops and warns that he already told him to stop calling him old once and for all. The spirit laughs loudly and says that someone from 500 years ago is definitely an elder. He pretends his memory is failing due to age, provoking Vinchen in the corridor. The young man accepts the name Davin, and Julian gives a military salute, laughing at his face. Suddenly, the mood shifts, and the spirit announces that combat training is about to begin. An explosion of energy erupts in the air as the two prepare to test their limits. Vinchen observes the guards and wonders how martial arts have evolved over 5 centuries. He wants to see how strong the descendants of the traitor Kajin have become all this time. But as he tries to move, Vinchen feels his body heavy, and an unbearable dizziness strikes him. He collapses, feeling his muscles fail as if his body were rejecting his soul. The pain is agonizing, a silent scream tearing through his chest as he tries to breathe. He realizes the body is a wreck and needs constant mana just to survive. In the midst of despair, Vinchen feels a strange flow of energy coming from within him. He leaps to his feet, shouting for Julian, wanting to understand what's happening. The spirit appears in pajamas, yawning, and asks why he's making so much noise. Vinchen grabs him by the collar and demands to know why he never trained in swordsmanship before. Julian calmly says he was born with a disability that made learning impossible. Vinchen doesn't accept the excuse and asks how someone with such potential can be called disabled. He explodes, saying that the boy possesses the legendary celestial exoskeleton, a divine gift. Julian floats, bewildered, as Vinchen explains he can store mana even within his bones. The spirit pauses, repeating in shock, "Store mana directly in the body's bone structure?" Vinchen loses his patience and begins to explain how a martial artist achieves transcendent power. He shows that mana is normally stored in the hearts of common humans, but with the celestial exoskeleton, Vinchen will have an infinite reserve of energy in every single bone. The boy still doesn't grasp the vital importance of wielding such absurd power. Vinchen reveals the secret. Kajin, the Hero King, also possessed this same rare gift. It's ironic that he is reincarnated with the same genetics as the man he envied the most. He looks out the window, realizing the current world is far stranger than he ever imagined. Julian returns to the present, saying he can't link the image to his heart. Vinchen is utterly bewildered, asking what the hell this image he mentioned even is. The spirit explains it's an imaginary reservoir where people nowadays store their mana. Vinchen is in shock, learning that no one uses their heart for meditation and training anymore. He questions what kind of bizarre meditation methods they're practicing these days. Vinchen remembers that Arslan used Falker's ancient method to strengthen the center of his chest. Julian explains that now they measure strength by stars created in this imaginary reservoir. They abandoned the physical method for being too dangerous, and Vinchen can barely believe it. Now, to be considered a one-star warrior, the requirement is simply to feel mana in the image. He looks at his sword, realizing they created this shortcut simply to avoid mortal risks. In the past, half of all warriors died because their hearts exploded from the pressure of raw mana. Vinchen closes his eyes, beginning to concentrate all his energy directly into his chest. Julian panics, begging him to stop before his heart is destroyed right then and there. But Vinchen warns that the one-armed Daven grew up taking that risk, and he will do the same. The spirit screams that he's letting mana leak and that the circuit formula is wrong. Vinchen tells him to shut up, asking since when an energy flow needs a formula. Julian insists that without the correct formula, it's impossible to use power efficiently. The young man says that in his era, they did everything by instinct and the feeling of battle. Julian reminds him that half of those who tried ended up with their power circuits exploding. Vinchen retorts that if half lived, then those odds were more than good enough for him. The spirit begs him to treat that body as something precious, and Vinchen pretends to agree. But he questions why Julian allowed such a perfect body to reach this deplorable state. The spirit falls silent, unsure how to respond to the warrior's direct accusation. Vinchen says that with this structure, he would have been a genius if he had trained with the Samian. The problem is that the body has been starved of mana for 13 years, and now it's paying the price. Vinchen Adenka will die before even becoming an adult if nothing is done quickly. The room falls silent as the gravity of the situation weighs on Vinchen's shoulders. Meditation might delay the end, but he only has 10 more years of life left. 10 years is enough time for the traitor to be forgotten, and for him to plan his return. It was the same amount of time Davin spent rotting in his cell, wishing to live a single healthy day. Those 10 years in darkness were an absurd nightmare he would never forget. Suddenly, someone punches the room door, demanding the young master answer immediately. Vinchen jolts out of his trance, asking dryly who the audacious person interrupting him is. A green-haired man enters without permission, glaring at Vinchen with utter disrespect. He complains about the messy room and asks what the boy thinks he's doing. Vinchen glares at him with contempt, asking if this fellow is his personal servant. The man named Wilson scoffs, saying Julian wanted to cut his throat in 3 years. Vinchen decides he won't waste any more time thinking about the past or ghosts now. He orders Wilson to bring clean clothes and clean up all the mess in the room without complaining. The servant freezes, realizing Vinchen's gaze is far heavier and stronger than usual. He tries to insist on asking what happened there, suspecting some forbidden experiment. Vinchen merely denies it coldly, offering no explanation to the insolent servant. Wilson explodes, declaring that he's completely lost his mind and that he'll report him to the patriarch right away. Vinchen laughs in his face, commenting on how rare it is to see someone so formal and impertinent. He warns that the servant is being far too audacious in disobeying a direct order from his master. Vinchen reminds him that, while it may have created more work, cleaning the room is his only duty. Wilson screams that he hates doing what he doesn't want to, and that he's not there to be anyone's doormat. Vinchen approaches with a deadly glare and reiterates, "You are a servant, am I wrong?" He gives up on Wilson for a moment and says he'll get his own clothes. Wilson asks where he's going, and Vinchen replies that he's going to speak with the Grand Chamberlain. He will personally explain that Wilson refuses to work and prefers to loaf around. The servant panics, grabs the clothes, and swears he'll clean everything if Vinchen just stays quiet. Vinchen watches Wilson leave and realizes that this brute was placed there simply to humiliate him. Julian reappears and agrees that the servant's situation was orchestrated by the family itself. They want Vinchen to resolve the problem and display the authority an Adenka should possess. The spirit warns that Wilson was a gang member who had killed many people in the past. Vinchen smiles and explains that those who have truly killed many possess an energy that Wilson lacks. He asserts that the servant is merely a cowardly liar with eyes too innocent for a murderer. Julian is impressed and asks how the boy can differentiate these things with such precision. Vinchen replies with a dark gaze that he knows this because he lived a life surrounded by death. The spirit trembles, wondering if he has invoked something far more terrifying than a king. Someone calls from outside, and the door opens again with Wilson bringing what was requested. He hands over the clean clothes and asks, trying to be cynical, if the room is to his liking. Wilson asks him not to turn the room into a battlefield the next time he trains. The servant thinks Vinchen has become submissive again, and that he remains a useless, proud boy. But Vinchen orders him to bring a 1-meter wooden sword made of black ebony. Wilson feels his blood boil and asks with a mocking smile what would happen if he refused. Vinchen warns that if he doesn't go, the master himself will, and Wilson will have to explain himself to the guards. He reminds him that the guards of the warehouse are loyal warriors, and Wilson freezes at the implicit threat. The servant tries to argue but realizes that Vinchen is no longer playing with words. He tries to approach from behind, but Vinchen notices the hostile movement instantly. In a swift move, Vinchen immobilizes Wilson on the ground before he could react. He apologizes sarcastically, saying he has bad memories of being attacked from behind. Vinchen tells him to engrave this lesson in his mind, never to attempt such a foolish thing again. When the servant leaves, Vinchen feels his body scream in pain from that small physical effort alone. Wilson returns furious but stops short, seeing that Vinchen wasn't even fazed by his presence. The young master asks coldly if he still has any complaints to spit out. The servant stutters and confirms the details of the wooden sword, just to get out of there quickly. Vinchen mocks him, reminding him that Wilson had said he didn't want to do the job. He shouts that he never said that, and slams the door with all his might. The bang echoes down the corridor as the servant stomps away, fuming with pure hatred. Wilson tries to justify himself through the door crack, saying it was just the wind that closed it. Vinchen smiles to himself and calls the servant a brat, since he hadn't even opened his mouth. Outside, Wilson walks away, determined never to be humiliated by that weak boy again. He swears to himself that he will show who's boss, and why he is the feared Wilson. The servant returns with the sword, and asks disdainfully if Vinchen thought it would be that easy. Vinchen ignores the bravado and comments on an acquaintance who had no right arm. He recounts that the man had a hard life and a terrible end because of his weakness. Wilson finally hands over the wooden sword, and Vinchen thanks him with an enigmatic gaze. The servant flees the room, feeling deep shame and a fear he can't explain. Vinchen is now alone, and decides it's time to begin his true combat training. He feels the weight of the wood in his hand, remembering what it was like to wield true steel. The sound of his strikes cuts through the room's air as he trains his basic fencing movements. He finishes exhausted, realizing his exoskeleton is still too weak for what he plans. But Vinchen smiles in the end. He was born to be a monster on the battlefields. A sudden movement cuts through the air, and he quickly turns, sensing he's no longer alone in that training yard. A blond young man appears with a mocking gaze, surprised someone so weak would still try to manipulate mana energy. He introduces himself as Revan Adenka, and immediately hurls an insult. "You're that useless Vinchen, aren't you?" Vinchen maintains his icy gaze, remembering that Revan is merely a descendant of the collateral lineage seeking attention. Julian's spirit observes everything in silence, feeling the tension rise between the two young men of the Adenka family. Vinchen recognizes Revan's features, remembering he had crossed paths with that arrogant boy's father before. Revan announces that he is the rising star of the collaterals and has come to personally assess his future opponent. The tournament's name echoes in Vinchen's mind. The assembly of royal swords is drawing ever closer. It's a brutal competition where young martial families fight with real blades to prove their worth. The winner earns the right to challenge the direct heir of the same age, and that heir is none other than Vinchen. Revan provokes him, saying he shouldn't run away in fear, because there, things won't end with just wood. The boy bursts into laughter and mocks the direct lineage, saying Vinchen is all talk and nothing more. Vinchen remains unfazed and calmly replies, "You should also learn to speak better to your superiors." He reprimands his cousin, saying that even provocations require class, and that his behavior is far too rude. Vinchen recalls his life as Davin, where respect was earned on the ground, and declares Revan a disgrace. Revan boils with hatred and attacks Vinchen's father's honor, thinking it would make him break down and cry. "Damn you, do you dare insult my father?" Vinchen decides then and there that there would be no forgiveness for such wanton disrespect. Julian warns that Revan is a 2-star level with a body of steel, making him much stronger now. Vinchen knows he would lose in brute strength, but realizes Revan is plagued by a deep inferiority complex. Vinchen's mind travels 500 years into the past, lamenting how much the mindset of martial artists had regressed in that time. Revan prepares a mana-charged strike, ready to crush the cousin he considers a talentless piece of trash. But Vinchen perfectly controls the distance, and warns that, in the past, boys like him would be beaten by elders for such insolence. Revan freezes, seeing the tip of the wooden sword pointed at his throat, unable to comprehend Vinchen's speed. He tries to convince himself that Vinchen has no mana and cannot win, but cold sweat begins to trickle down. A murderous aura emanates from Vinchen, and Revan feels he could be cut in half at any moment if he blinked. Vinchen deliberately lowers his guard and suggests they stop there, before something worse happens to his cousin. He scoffs, saying there would be no fun fighting in the tournament if Revan is already dying of fear now. At the assembly, Steel will truly sing. Are you ready for that? Vinchen leaves the question hanging in the air. Revan's face contorts in pure fury and humiliation. He had never been treated this way by a failure. Consumed by hatred, he lunges, screaming that he will kill Vinchen right then and there, breaking all family rules. The strike comes with full force, a clear murderous intent that would make anyone freeze in absolute terror. Revan's eyes are bloodshot. He has completely lost control of his reason in the face of Vinchen's insulting calm. Julian panics and begs him to dodge, but Vinchen remains still, fully trusting his senses. Suddenly, a dark-cloaked guard appears and immobilizes Revan, preventing disaster in the yard. Julian sighs in relief while Vinchen merely watches the scene with a slight smirk, as if he had expected it all along. The guard warns that harming Vinchen there would give him an excuse to evade the official tournament, so they must wait. Revan breaks free in a rage and promises that the reckoning will be in the arena, calling Vinchen a cowardly wimp. Julian complains that it was too dangerous, and asks why Vinchen provoked someone so unstable and strong. Vinchen merely leafs through a book and says he was just teaching a necessary lesson to an ill-mannered child. Julian complains he wanted to summon a powerful spirit king, but Vinchen prefers to study modern combat theory. He finds an old portrait in the book and pauses for a second, feeling a strange connection to the past. Julian brings him back into focus to explain about blessings and the special characteristics of current warriors. He explains that characteristics are blessings artificially created by humans through the analysis of ancient powers. Vinchen is shocked to learn that humans dare to create blessings, thinking it would draw the gods' wrath. Julian tells him not to worry, as no one has been punished for using this type of power so far. They discuss Revan's ability, which is a physical characteristic that allows total mastery over one's own body. The more Revan trains his martial arts, the stronger and more destructive his body becomes, like a living weapon. Julian explains that these modern teachings focus on only one aspect, but they make the user incredibly strong very quickly. Vinchen realizes it was due to this lack of balance that Revan almost had his neck pierced during their discussion. To compete against such monsters, he decides he needs to elevate his original skills to a new level of perfection. Dawn breaks, and the training yard of the Adenka mansion is already bustling with servants and soldiers. Vinchen returns to his post, ignoring everything around him and focusing solely on the repetitive motion of his sword. Other soldiers watch from afar and start laughing, saying he can't even use mana imagination. Suddenly, silence falls over the group as an imposing figure emerges behind them with a severe gaze. It's Merlin, the vice commander of the White Sword Unit, who asks what's so amusing. The soldiers tremble in fear and offer immediate apologies, fleeing as fast as their legs can carry them. Merlin watches Vinchen train and, for a moment, almost agrees that he seems like a hopeless young man. To see someone swinging a sword without mana or special characteristics is considered a disgrace among nobles. Julian whispers that everyone is bad-mouthing him and suggests they train in the forest to avoid the judgmental stares. Vinchen replies that he's already accustomed to contempt, recalling his time as the one-armed Daven. "I once turned boos into applause," he says with determination, "and I'll make it happen again now." Merlin approaches and hands him a shimmering vial, stating it's an advanced mana recovery potion. Vinchen accepts the gift with surprise and asks who this man is, being so kind to him. He formally introduces himself as Merlin and admits that, at first, he too doubted the young master's potential. But something about the way Vinchen held his sword made him change his mind and want to help somehow. Merlin says Vinchen's eyes seek something desperately, and that laughing at a martial artist is the true shame. Vinchen etches Merlin's name into his memory, recognizing he'd found someone with honor within that rotten family. He apologizes for disrupting the patrol, and Merlin bids farewell, sensing the boy had drastically changed. The commander wishes him good luck and withdraws, as Vinchen returns to striking the dummy with renewed vigor. The sound of wood hitting leather echoes through the empty yard, marking the rhythm of Vinchen's obsession. He repeats the same attack arc hundreds of times, seeking the perfection his mind remembers so well. The sun begins to set, and Vinchen still hasn't stopped. His shirt is drenched, and his muscles scream. Julian observes his host's insane dedication, beginning to believe that glory truly can return. Vinchen focuses on the balance of his right leg and the rotation of his hip, feeling the energy begin to flow. He finally feels the mana vibrating in his heart, connecting with the intent of his wooden blade. The world around him seems to slow, and he begins to perceive the invisible lines of the sword's path. The image of his past life as the great Daven resurfaces, guiding his movements with ancestral mastery. He visualizes the path made of dots and lines, stacking mana in each joint to manifest his power. With a silent roar, he unleashes his final blow, and the air around the dummy seems to be sliced apart. Vinchen's eyes widen as he sees the result and realizes he has finally achieved what he so desperately sought. His swordsmanship technique is complete, ready to be tested against the real steel of his enemies. Wilson enters the hallway, fuming with anger, complaining that Vinchen wakes too early and forces him to work. He decides he'll try to humiliate his master somehow to vent his daily frustration. The servant enters the room with the breakfast tray and announces the meal with a mocking tone. Vinchen looks at the plate and remains silent for a few seconds, which makes Wilson a bit uncomfortable. The plate contains only a few cold leftovers, a clear attempt at insult from the insolent servant. Vinchen warns that if he wanted to steal the food for himself, he shouldn't have made it so obvious. Wilson stammers an excuse, but Vinchen retorts that he should have at least wiped his mouth first. The young master says he can let it slide this time, finding the attempt cute, but warns him seriously. Vinchen's eyes gleam with a dangerous light, and he orders Wilson never to cross that line again. The servant tries to assert himself, saying he was a street gangster and had killed many people in the past. Vinchen lets out a disdainful sigh and says, "Oh, how terrifying," continuing to eat calmly. He explains that control through fear is easy, but doesn't win hearts, and then uses telepathy to scare Wilson. The servant goes into shock upon hearing Vinchen's voice inside his head, realizing he has mana. Vinchen tells him to stop being so proud and stay by his side, promising that soon Wilson will be proud of his master. Choose when the time comes, Vinchen says, to be ruled by fear or to show your true loyalty. Wilson stumbles out of the room, unable to comprehend how loyalty could be forged from such sudden, intense pressure. He leans against the door, gasping for breath, feeling as though his life had irrevocably shifted in that very instant. The servant admits to himself that Vinchen's presence is far too imposing for him to be merely a useless lord. Later, Merlin returns to the training grounds and realizes Vinchen has already finished his practice and left early. He glances at the training dummy and notices something strange on the surface of the material. Merlin approaches, his brow furrowed, sensing that something is terribly wrong with this peaceful scene. He wonders if it was done with a real blade, for the cut is too clean, too deep. But he remembers Vinchen only had a wooden sword, which makes it utterly impossible to explain. The precision of the cut is horrifying, and Merlin questions if such evolution is even possible in just a few days. He gazes at the horizon, realizing that young Master Vinchen hides a secret that could shake the very foundations of the family. Julian is also curious, wondering what bizarre martial art Vinchen is developing all on his own. Vinchen merely walks with an air of confidence, feeling his body finally responding to his mental commands. They cross paths with Wilson in the corridor, and Julian notes that the servant is now incredibly polite and helpful. Vinchen remarks that people like Wilson know how to take initiative, but not how to cope when they lose control. Suddenly he stops and calls the servant, questioning the origin of his new clothes. Vinchen points out that the fabric is made of cheap cotton that degrades the soil, something no noble would ever wear. He also notes that the quality of the food is far too low for the Adenka family's millionaire budget. Vinchen concludes that someone is stealing money, and Julian immediately suspects Wilson is the culprit. Wilson hears the technical terms and turns pale, realizing his master understands far more than he lets on. But Vinchen knows it isn't Wilson. The embezzlement is far too grand and must come from someone much higher up. Meanwhile, in another part of the mansion, the sound of steel slicing through the air indicates that Revan is also training. The blonde boy stops to rest, sweaty and exhausted from pushing his body to its absolute limit. He remembers the humiliation he suffered in the courtyard and wonders why he felt such immense fear of a mere wooden stick. Revan grinds his teeth in frustration, feeling the heavy weight of his collateral lineage's expectations on his shoulders. He shouts, questioning who would fear trash like Vinchen, and returns to training with blind fury. Revan's father enters the room and asks about his progress for the upcoming tournament. The boy tries to catch his breath as his father stares at him with cold eyes, brimming with dark ambition. The man warns that not much time remains, and that the assembly of royal swords will decide their future. To escape poverty and the scorn of the collateral families, Revan must defeat Vinchen, no matter the cost. His father grabs his son's arm with excessive force, showing he will accept nothing less than total victory. Revan must become the collateral lineage member who will bring down the main family once and for all. The youth agrees, but notes that his father's obsession is becoming increasingly dangerous and irritable with time. He swears that if he defeats Vinchen, his family can finally reclaim the honor and life they deserve. Back in Vinchen's room, Julian brings a complete list with information on all the tournament participants. He has gathered details on the techniques, habits, and weaknesses of every competitor who will cross Vinchen's path. Vinchen admits that Julian's work is frighteningly good and gives him an unfair advantage. Julian explains that Vinchen's original plan was to use the strength of a spirit king, but things have changed. He shows him the image of a rare mana crystal that will be given as the ultimate prize to the grand champion. From Vinchen's expression, Julian realizes the boy's desire to win is greater than anyone could possibly imagine. Vinchen smiles and says it would be a disgrace to lose with so much information and so many resources now at his disposal. He promises to give Julian a victory far more valuable than any spirit or precious stone could ever provide. Vinchen's gaze shines with the flame of an ancient hero, poised to reclaim his rightful throne. He rings the silver bell and calls Wilson, who appears immediately, his face bathed in nervous sweat. The servant asks what the young master desires, already expecting some impossible order to fulfill. Vinchen says he has a crucial task for him, something Wilson must do with the utmost discretion. He hands him a sealed letter, and Wilson feels the weight of responsibility upon seeing the family's official crest. Wilson walks to Raelsa's office and knocks on the door, trembling before the authority of the general housekeeper. He enters timidly and greets the woman who commands all the servants of the Adenka mansion with an iron fist. Raelsa is focused on her documents and barely glances at Wilson, treating him like an insignificant insect. She orders him to state his business immediately, her purple eyes gleaming through her glasses. Wilson knows she is a 7-star martial artist and feels the air grow heavy around her. He delivers the message that Vinchen wants to speak with the patriarch, and Raelsa laughs, thinking he's a coward. But Wilson continues. Vinchen demands that the family head himself attend the Royal Swords Assembly in person. Raelsa stops writing instantly, shocked by the audacity of a boy who has never proven his worth to his father. She realizes Vinchen is using the secret of the embezzled funds to blackmail her and force the meeting. Wilson repeats Vinchen's words, "Make possible what seems impossible to others." Raelsa stands up furiously, asking what he said, and Wilson shrinks, saying he merely repeated the orders. She orders him out immediately, and Wilson slams the door shut in haste, relieved to still have his head on his shoulders. Raelsa reflects on Vinchen's intelligence in sending Wilson, instead of going personally to assert his authority. She smiles enigmatically, beginning to understand the true intentions of the heir everyone despised. In a dark, luxurious hall, Patriarch Adenka meditates, surrounded by an overwhelming and cold aura of power. He senses Raelsa's approaching presence and remains with his back turned, focused on his own internal energy. Without turning, he calls her name, and his voice echoes through the walls like distant thunder. Raelsa presents Vinchen's official invitation, warning that the young master wants to prove his lineage in the tournament. The patriarch scoffs, saying age is affecting Raelsa, and that Vinchen has no talent for fighting whatsoever. Prove his worth? He asks sarcastically, thinking his son is merely delusional in his search for approval. He questions Raelsa if she truly believes Vinchen has enough skill to represent the Adenka name. She responds that not yet, but he promised to show something grand that will change everyone's opinion. Raelsa pleads for the patriarch to attend, promising that she herself will be the official witness of that combat. The patriarch asks if she understands the risk, and Raelsa kneels. If Vinchen fails, I will offer my head. The family leader is intrigued, not understanding why she would risk her life for such a weak and useless boy. He suspects the budget deviation is the reason, but Raelsa remains firm in her dangerous decision. She apologizes for the inconvenience, but insists the patriarch see his son's change with his own eyes. The patriarch says he has no reason to interfere and reminds her that Raelsa serves Vinchen's mother, not him. But he admits that Vinchen's method of sending the message without losing dignity is very familiar. An image of a warrior woman appears in his mind, and he wonders if Vinchen is truly her son. The man finally concedes and says she won this round, showing a glimmer of genuine curiosity. "I will participate in the Royal Swords Assembly," he announces, sealing the fate of everyone in that mansion. The day of the tournament finally arrives, and the arena is packed with spectators hungry for blood and glory. Revan Adenka walks towards the entrance gate with a sheathed royal sword and a murderous gaze. He stares at Vinchen from afar and promises himself, "Prepare yourself, Vinchen. I will destroy you in front of everyone today." But looking up, he notices an imposing figure observing everything. The shock is immediate. Patriarch Khan is present to witness the tournament. Revan smiles, thinking the leader came to see his ascent as the family's new star. The signal is given, and the announcer proclaims the start of the Royal Swords Assembly. Revan charges at his first opponent, yelling for him to just die already. The blow is heavy, and the opponent can barely react to the impact. He tries to retaliate, warning Revan not to be so overconfident. Revan merely scoffs and asks if that was even an attack. He boasts about his Steelman attribute, which makes him almost invulnerable. With a brutal movement, he throws his opponent away without the slightest effort. In the stands, Charles celebrates his son's victory scandalously. The crowd whispers that Revan is a 2-star genius who can win everything. From afar, Vinchen observes and thinks that, by old standards, they would be considered prodigies. But for the reincarnated warrior, their martial arts lack real depth. Vinchen sees them as puppets dancing to a memorized script. It is because of this lack of experience that Revan attacks so carelessly. The round's winner walks to the center of the arena to applause. Revan glares at Vinchen and says, "I'll give you credit for not having run away yet." The patriarch remains in absolute silence, merely observing the tension on the field. The clang of swords echoes as the crowd goes wild for the next bout. Yet another fighter falls before the brutal might of Revan Adenka. The referee halts the fight and declares Revan the grand victor of the qualifiers. Proudly, Revan bows before the patriarch and the family elders. He then announces that, by law, he wishes to face his friend, Vinchen, in the final battle. Vinchen walks calmly, ready to face the direct descendant in front of everyone. With an icy gaze, he replies, "I accept the challenge." The two take their positions in the center of the arena as the atmosphere freezes. Referee Jaron introduces himself, but Vinchen interrupts him, stating he has a condition. He calls his assistant, Wilson, who carries something covered by a cloth. Vinchen announces, "I'll only use this wooden sword and my left hand against him." Charles and the other nobles are indignant, asking if the boy has gone mad. Vinchen goes further, promising not to move from his spot during Revan's first 3 attacks. Revan explodes in rage, asking if Vinchen intends to mock him until the very end. The crowd roars that this is absurd, coming from someone who doesn't even know how to use mana. Charles tries to convince the patriarch that Vinchen is merely preparing excuses for his defeat. To everyone's surprise, Patriarch Khan authorizes the bizarre condition. He warns coldly, "Vinchen, you had better prove your words with actions." Vinchen smirks disdainfully and assures him he will do exactly that. The nervous referee officially announces the start of the day's most anticipated duel. Revan grinds his teeth and prepares as Vinchen repeats that he will let him attack first. Flag drops and the cry of "Begin" echoes throughout the packed arena. Revan charges forward, screaming for Vinchen to die while he stands still like a statue. Vinchen analyzes coldly and identifies the start of the enemy's first move. He knows there's a strong chance it's just a short thrust. Revan lunges with everything he has, intent on wiping that arrogant smirk off the young master's face. For a second, Revan thinks he's landed the fatal blow to the chest. Vinchen realizes that most movements are merely feints for the second thrust. He sees everything in slow motion, noting that Revan doesn't even follow basic defense. Vinchen muses that heavy swords were not made for this type of attack. With a dry flick, he deflects the giant blade, using only the wooden sword. Revan panics, seeing his strike repelled in an impossible fashion. Vinchen calmly stares at him and warns that he has already allowed 2 attacks. His opponent snarls with hatred, calling Vinchen a wretched bastard. He orders Vinchen to stop acting as if he knows some cheap trick. Vinchen prepares his hand, concentrating the minimal energy needed for the decisive blow. His feet move with millimeter precision as Revan completely loses his balance. In a blur of motion, Vinchen dominates the space and brings his opponent down. Revan groans in pain, feeling the blunt impact against the arena floor. Vinchen's silhouette looms like a nightmare, warning him that the 3rd attack is over. He whispers to himself that he will keep the promise he made to Julian. Vinchen declares that now it's his turn to attack and turn the tables. The weight of the promise made to the body's former owner shines in his eyes. He reaffirms that the promise to his father will also be fulfilled from this moment on. The audience falls into absolute silence, unable to comprehend how quickly the tide of battle turned. Charles shouts from the stands for Revan to get up and stop embarrassing himself. Revan wonders how he can be struggling against someone who doesn't even possess mana. The spirit mentor Jaron asks what's happening, as even he didn't see the strike. Vinchen teaches that standing unarmed is not the end for a true martial artist. Revan rises furiously, desperately searching for an explanation for his own incompetence. He accuses Vinchen of secretly obtaining power from a lesser god. Vinchen tells him he can think whatever he wants, but his thoughts die right here. Revan attacks again, ignoring the danger warnings screaming in his mind. Revan's blade cuts through the air, but Vinchen is no longer in its path. The young master glides like a shadow, exposing all of his opponent's flaws. Revan realizes too late that his flank is completely open for the strike. Vinchen surgically strikes the vital point with his wooden sword. His opponent finds it strange that he feels no immediate pain after the impact. Charles laughs, saying a wooden sword would never break his son's defense. Vinchen knows his current body is weak and cannot yet withstand extreme powers. But he predicts that Revan's false confidence will make him attack all the same. He decides to use the very force of Revan's strike against himself. The impact is devastating, and Revan lets out a stifled cry of pure agony. The prodigy's body is launched into the air as if he were a rag doll. Vinchen asks Jaron to prepare to prevent a greater tragedy from occurring. Jaron looks on, startled, not understanding the gravity of what Vinchen plans to do. Vinchen knows he only has one chance, and that his body might collapse after this. He needs to finish the fight while the enemy is still vulnerable in the air. Revan tries to recover in mid-air, but fear finally dominates his face. He curses Vinchen as he desperately tries to prepare a final defense. Vinchen focuses his gaze and murmurs, "I can see the path now." He visualizes the line connecting the mana points between himself and Revan. Vinchen tells Julian to look closely, for that is his true swordsmanship. An intense, shadowy glow emanates from Vinchen's wooden sword. The air around the arena begins to distort with the pressure of the technique. Vinchen executes the final move with a speed that defies reality. The Patriarch and the Elders lean forward, shocked by what they see. The technique cuts through space and twists the flow of mana, nullifying any enemy ability. Revan lets out a tearing scream that echoes throughout the silent stadium. He clutches his own arm in horror, realizing that something terrible has happened. Vinchen calmly asks Jaron if he needs to cut off his leg too to win. The referee, trembling, raises his hand and declares Vinchen Adenka the victor. Charles leaps into the arena, shouting for a priest to stop his son's bleeding. Jaron apologizes to Vinchen, feeling guilty for not having prevented the injury. Jaron warns that Vinchen's body is at its limit and he needs to rest. Vinchen merely smiles, satisfied that he has kept his word before everyone. He addresses the Patriarch, treating him with the cold respect of a lord. Vinchen reminds him that the leader said he would attest to the difference between the bloodlines. Patriarch Khan confirms with a heavy gaze, full of new questions. He announces Vinchen's victory again, validating the official tournament result. The leader orders everyone into the mansion for the start of the award ceremony. The luxurious hall receives the nobles, while Revan is carried away on a stretcher. The tension is palpable between the main and collateral family members present. Khan declares that whoever has overcome adversity will receive the legendary Miracle Stone. The glow of the mystical gem illuminates Vinchen's face as he awaits his prize. Suddenly, Charles bursts in, yelling that none of this makes any sense. He screams that it's all just a dirty, cowardly trick by Vinchen. Charles accuses the young master of having used the forbidden power of an apostle. The nervous priest approaches and warns that a serious problem has arisen with Revan. The Patriarch asks what is wrong, his voice laden with authority. The cleric reveals that young Revan's injured arm is in a strange state. He drops a bombshell. The severed arm simply cannot be reattached. Those present are in absolute shock at the news of the permanent invalidity. The wound seems to reject any attempt at traditional magical healing from the priests. Charles plunges into despair, refusing to accept that his son will be crippled. He assaults the priest, demanding they do their job and heal the arm. Vinchen observes the scene, showing no sign of remorse or weakness. The priest explains that the wound was caused by something beyond their divine power. He warns that not even a high priest will be able to fix this if they delay. Charles implores the Patriarch to intervene against what he calls malicious trickery. Some nobles begin to agree, finding Vinchen's technique far too suspicious. Vinchen requests permission to respond, and the Patriarch nods in affirmation. He reminds them that the tournament took place under the Patriarch's direct authority and presence. Vinchen points out that questioning the result is challenging the family's leader himself. He asks if Charles believes his judgment is superior to that of Patriarch Khan. Vinchen then orders Jaron to arrest Charles Adenka for public insubordination. Jaron hesitates for a moment, confirming if he should truly arrest Revan's father. Charles tries to resist, but Vinchen reinforces that the crime of disrespect has been committed. Jaron obeys the direct heir's order and moves to fulfill his duty. The man is restrained and shouts to be released as he's forcibly taken away. The Patriarch stares at the prisoner and calls his name in a menacing tone. He says Charles should be grateful to Vinchen for his unexpected benevolence. Khan explains that, were it not for Vinchen's gesture, Charles would suffer worse sanctions. The leader forgives Charles this time, but demands he never open his mouth again. The patriarch praises Vinchen for his exemplary performance throughout the trial. Vinchen thanks him with false modesty, acting like a devoted son seeking approval. Meanwhile, Revan's condition worsens, and he groans in pain on the stretcher. The physician warns that if they don't act now, the right arm will be lost forever. Jaron whispers something into Vinchen's ear, suggesting a master political move. Vinchen agrees, seeing a golden opportunity to gain even more influence. He asks the cleric if the miracle stone could heal Revan's arm. The priest realizes that Vinchen is offering his own prize to save his enemy. Vinchen assumes the cure is possible and takes charge of the critical situation. He states that since he was the one who cut off the arm, he himself will put an end to this. The patriarch observes curiously and allows his son to take the reins of the moment. Vinchen reminds Charles that Revan mocked him in the sacred place of martial artists. He draws his royal blade and warns that everything must be proven through actions. The gleam of the sword cuts through the air, creating an execution-like atmosphere in the middle of the hall. Vinchen demands that Charles show repentance worthy of a true warrior. He quotes the ancient law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. For the right arm, Vinchen coldly declares that he will need someone's right arm in return. He looks at Revan with contempt, calling the fallen youth a pathetic loser. Vinchen notices Revan is conscious and wonders where filial piety has gone. In an act of desperation, Charles agrees to sacrifice his own arm for his son's sake. He positions his arm on the table, trembling with fear but determined to suffer. Vinchen admits that, despite being twisted, it is still a type of paternal love. Charles lets out a battle cry as he prepares for the merciful blow. Vinchen gives the signal to interrupt any unnecessary disaster at the last second. The referee Jaron intervenes and blocks Charles's movement before the cut. Charles gasps with relief and terror, realizing how close he was to mutilation. Jaron hopes he uses that courage for something better in the family's future. Vinchen informs the patriarch that the situation has been resolved in the fairest way possible. Leader Khan smiles for the first time, satisfied with the cunning his son has displayed. Vinchen hands the miracle stone to the priest with a gesture of detachment. He orders the ritual to begin immediately to save what's left of Revan. The cleric invokes the goddess Gaia, pleading for mercy and a miracle for the young man. A radiant light envelops Revan's body, mending severed tissues and fractured mana. Charles weeps with joy as he sees his son's arm restored by Vinchen's generosity. Julian watches the scene with a mix of relief and concern, remembering that it was Vinchen who suggested giving up the valuable stone. He confesses he still feels sad about losing such a rare item, capable of changing the very physiology of an elite warrior. Vinchen remains silent, walking with the posture of one who has already planned every move in this dangerous and cruel political game. Hidden behind the door, the servant watches the young master, awestruck, finding Vinchen's demeanor the coolest thing in the world. Vinchen turns and casts a sharp gaze, ordering the man to decide whether he will surrender to fear or swear absolute loyalty. The servant clenches his fist with determination, the smile on his face making it clear he has already made his definitive choice today. He exclaims that loyalty is far more thrilling, while in the background Charles embraces his injured son in a moment of pure anguish. The green-haired young man rushes towards his lord, enthusiastically shouting for the young master who has just shown in the hall. He announces that he'll soon begin preparing dinner, while Vinchen merely nods, maintaining his intact and icy aura of superiority. Julian floats beside him and asks what's wrong, since the servant has finally recognized him as the sole master. The spirit huffs and crosses his arms, complaining that he expected something much bigger and grander to mark this historic moment. Knocks echo at the door, and Vinchen wonders if the visitor has arrived, giving the short, sharp order for them to enter. A man in a white robe enters the room and asks if the young master has been well since their encounter at the tournament. The visitor bows elegantly, bringing with him an aura of peace that contrasts with the heavy atmosphere of the Adenka mansion. He formally introduces himself as Dullan, a pontiff of the goddess Gaia, coming directly from the temple to address pending matters. Vinchen questions the reason for the visit, and the priest explains he came to express his sincere gratitude for what happened earlier. Julian's eyes widen, realizing that the presence of such a high-ranking member of the clergy here is neither common nor simple. Dulin extends his hand and reveals the miracle stone, the prize Vinchen had sacrificed to save his enemy's life. Vinchen stares at the sparkling jewel and asks why he is returning something that was legally given to the temple for treatment. The priest explains that his life's purpose is to see those who suffer smile again, but today he felt lost and confused. He confesses that he ended up weighing the stone's value against human life, feeling ridiculed by the spontaneous generosity demonstrated by the young heir. Dulin states that, thanks to Vinchen, the priests were able to reflect on their own paths and asks him to accept the item back. Vinchen responds with feigned modesty that he did nothing remarkable, but accepts the stone so as not to disrespect the pontiff's noble gesture. The cleric smiles contentedly and rummages through his robes, indicating he brought something more to seal this new bond of friendship. He hands him a special card, advising that if Vinchen ever needs help, he just has to show it at any temple dedicated to the goddess Gaia. Dulin reveals that the card is a secret, as he has just been promoted to second-class pontiff, an extremely high-ranking position. Julian goes into total shock upon hearing this, while Vinchen, confused, asks if being a second class is really that good. The spirit explains, shouting, that this means unlimited treatment and free use of the temples, something ordinary people could never dream of. Dulin bows one last time, thanking him for the lessons learned, and departing with an expression of deep peace and mutual respect. Vinchen casually bids farewell, putting away the card that might be the key to surviving the dangers awaiting him in the future. Julian begins to boast, saying that now they have something far better than the support of common, low-level warriors. Vinchen notices the spirit getting embarrassed by direct praise, and teases, saying he must be weak against kind and sweet words. Julian quickly changes the subject, reminding him that they need to talk about something far more important and urgent for the master's survival. He recounts that Patriarch Khan usually dines alone, but there was a single time he invited a family member to dinner. That person was Dea Nunam, the second daughter, who achieved an overwhelming and absolute victory at the Assembly of Royal Swords long ago. Vinchen asks if there's a chance of being invited today, and Julian replies that the odds are 50% at best. Even with his body stiff from battle fatigue, Vinchen stands, knowing that rest is a luxury he doesn't yet possess. He decides to prepare as if the invitation is certain, because neglecting even 1% of a chance would be a fatal and unforgivable error. Julian scratches his head awkwardly, impressed by the seriousness and unwavering focus his master demonstrates in every small decision. Suddenly, the servant bursts in, shouting, interrupting the room's silence, with news that makes the air heavy. The man is pale, and stutters that the family head, the feared Patriarch Khan, has sent an urgent summons for the young man. Vinchen smiles, already anticipating the move, and orders the servant to immediately guide him to where his father awaits. The servant stood agape, marveling at how incredible his young master was to have foreseen even the Patriarch's summons. Night fell over the immense Adenka mansion, its Gothic towers seemingly guarding the dark secrets hidden within its stone walls. Vinchen walked through the luxurious corridors, head held high, as he approached the absolute center of power of that family of monsters. A woman of imposing presence intercepted him, urging him to hurry, for the Patriarch's time was short and precious. Vinchen greeted her as mother, but internally recalled she was Versa Halem, his stepmother and one of the most ferocious martial artists. She said Vinchen's father was waiting for him, her smile hiding a dangerous curiosity about her stepson's performance. Both walked in absolute silence, the tension between them almost palpable as they crossed the massive doors of the main hall. At the back of the room, seated on his throne of authority, Khan observed his son's arrival with eyes that seemed to pierce the soul. The Patriarch uttered Vinchen's name with a deep voice that made the walls vibrate and the hearts of the weak falter. A close-up on Khan's eyes revealed pupils dilated with energy, casting an overwhelming pressure that dominated the entire enclosed space. Vinchen felt the impact immediately, his lungs struggling for oxygen as his father's aura tried to force him to his knees in fear. He realized this was a final test to see if his courage demonstrated during the tournament was real or merely luck. With effort, Vinchen said he saw no need to exert such pressure on his own son in a meeting that should be private. Khan asked why he thought so, maintaining his active aura as he observed the defiant reaction of the young man he had always disdained. Vinchen pointed out that his stepmother had called him father instead of family leader, indicating this should be a family moment. The patriarch and Versa exchanged a quick glance, surprised by the young man's acute perception and the calm he maintained under such pressure. Khan admitted he did well to notice that detail, slightly reducing the weight of his energy to allow the conversation to flow. He revealed he had called him for two reasons. The first was to congratulate him on his unexpected and brilliant victory achieved before all. The second reason was to verify if Charles Adenka's concerns and accusations of possible fraud in the tournament held any water. The scene returned to the tournament, where Charles furiously screamed that Vinchen had used deceptive methods to defeat his son and sever his arm. The atmosphere in the hall grew dark again, with the leaders focused on discovering the truth behind the young man's sudden power. Versa observed Vinchen with a predatory gaze, her perceptive abilities ready to detect any lie or hesitation he might show. Vinchen met her gaze, knowing that a single slip now could mean the end of his journey and the death of his plans. Khan asked about the possibility of him being an apostle of some entity, but Versa replied that she sensed no supernatural support within him. The young man felt a chill run down his spine, realizing his stepmother's eyes possessed the mystical ability to see through the truth. She questioned what type of martial art he used, since Vinchen had not yet linked an image to his heart to use mana. Versa affirmed that his technique was identical to the swordsmanship of Hero King Kajin Samian, the greatest rival of the Adenka lineage. The image of a legendary warrior appeared, describing how he wielded his sword in strange ways to devour any existing evil ability. It was said that Sword was capable of subduing even the archdemon Davin, one of the most powerful and feared beings in ancient history. Vinchen internally fumed at this fabricated story, knowing that the Samions had twisted the past to become heroes in the eyes of the world. Versa demanded that he speak quickly and explain how a member of the Adenka family learned a forbidden technique from their greatest enemies. She approached, the shadow of her presence covering the young man as she repeated the question with a sweetness that hid a deadly threat. The pressure increased again, and she whispered if he would truly hide such an important secret from his own mother and master. Vinchen felt the weight of the situation, realizing he was at a crossroads where the truth could be as dangerous as silence. She asked again where he learned that martial art, her eyes glowing with a crimson light that seemed to burn his skin. Versa's face was inches from his, each word coming out like a sentence he couldn't simply ignore or avoid. Khan remained seated in the background, observing the scene like an impartial judge awaiting the right moment to deliver his final verdict. Vinchen realized he was being interrogated like a criminal, and that his stepmother was leading this relentless hunt for the truth. Julian suddenly appeared behind him, desperate, begging Vinchen not to say anything, fearing the lie would be instantly discovered by the woman. The spirit warned that her eyes could separate truth from illusion, and that any poorly crafted excuse would be their end. Vinchen wondered what he should do, contemplating whether he should reveal he was a man from 500 years ago in a young body. He decided he couldn't back down now and resolved to attempt a risky move to turn the tables in his favor at that instant. Versa continued to press, expecting her son to collapse under her gaze and confess everything he was hiding in his heart. Julian trembled with fear, confessing he had always dreaded her discovering he was a useless person pretending to be important in the family. Vinchen mentally said that it only takes one step to overcome fear, and Julian asked what exactly he meant by that. The image of a muscular, scar-marked warrior appeared in Vinchen's mind, symbolizing the strength needed to advance without hesitation. He declared aloud that he had received a revelation, taking the first firm step into the unknown to save his own skin. Khan, Versa, and Julian were in absolute shock upon hearing the word revelation leave the mouth of a young man with no apparent blessing. Versa asked how he received this without divine protection, recalling that most often this only happens to beings of an evil nature. Vinchen cursed internally because Julian hadn't warned him about this crucial detail, while his stepmother demanded an immediate answer to her doubts. She threatens to drag him before the sacred tribunal or the judges of Jaramiel if he continues to act so suspiciously and darkly. Julian whispers for him to follow exactly what he's about to say, frantically trying to find a logical escape from this dead end. Vinchen suggests that if they find him suspicious, They should simply verify the information with the temple and the priests of the goddess Gaia. The word temple makes Versa pause for a moment, doubt beginning to cloud her absolute certainty that something was amiss. Vinchen asks if a high-level priest wouldn't immediately recognize if he possessed any kind of malevolent or corrupted energy. He reveals the miracle stone, and Versa recognizes the item she herself gave to Dullen, surprised to see it in Vinchen's possession now. She scrutinizes her stepson with her eyes of truth and admits he isn't lying, as her power didn't react negatively. Versa asks if he truly learned a lot from the revelations, and Vinchen replies that he did, but not the fencing technique. He claims he's been observing mysterious sword movements for some time, hesitating whether or not to learn something so complex. Vinchen confesses he wanted to change, feeling it would be cowardice to do nothing, even if it drew suspicion from every possible direction. He declares he needed to prove his worth to surpass the Samion family and fulfill the ancestral mission of the Adenka lineage. Julian watches proudly, realizing Vinchen managed to sway the leaders by using their own ambition and family pride as a shield. The young man looks directly at Khan and says he wanted to display his evolution to all his relatives, and especially to his father. He concludes by stating he trusted the patriarch's fair judgment, as the temple had already given its implicit seal of approval. Khan thoughtfully rubs his chin, a gesture Vinchen knows indicates satisfaction and acceptance of what he just heard and saw. The patriarch straightens in his seat and declares he has made his final decision regarding his son's future and training. He orders Vinchen to continue training his martial arts freely, and the young man thanks him with a respectful, perfectly calculated bow. Khan mentions that Hero King Kajin's swordsmanship is similar to that of Great Demon King Davin, testing Vinchen's historical knowledge once more. Vinchen replies dryly that he is aware of this fact, maintaining his firm posture before the highest authority who watches him intently. Versa smiles, thinking that if they used the Samian technique, there would be problems, but no one would dare complain if it was the Demon King's technique. She asks her husband if his decision considered all these political factors and the risks of a diplomatic conflict. Khan gives her a severe look and replies that he had already considered everything that needed to be considered before giving his final word. Versa lets out a sigh of relief or resignation, realizing that the young man's destiny is now under the direct protection of the patriarch himself. She warns Vinchen that he must do his utmost not to cause any inconvenience or shame to his father after this chance. Vinchen understands that this is not just a warning, but confirmation that he now has her full support and approval. Khan praises the results achieved in the tournament and states that Vinchen has proven himself worthy of carrying the blood of a direct descendant. As a reward for his exemplary performance, the patriarch offers to grant a wish to the young warrior who surpassed all expectations today. Vinchen promptly replies that he wishes to become stronger, but Khan retorts that this is an obligation, not an optional gift. He insists that Vinchen ask for something he, as the family leader and father, can personally do or deliver now. Julian whispers for him to ask for entry to the library, and Vinchen repeats the request, asking for access to the Adenka family's secret archives. Khan warns that only 3-star warriors can enter, asking if his son has already managed to link the image to his heart. Vinchen admits he hasn't yet, but says he'd like to use this unique opportunity to act like a spoiled child. The patriarch lets out a slight chuckle and grants entry to the lowest-level library, suitable for someone just beginning their journey. He orders Versa to deliver the Crimson Lotus to Vinchen, a name that makes Julian's eyes widen in absolute shock once again. Khan tells him to take the sword as a reward for fulfilling the promise made before the start of this entire epic trial. The Crimson Lotus appears in all its splendor, the very sword Khan used in his youth to forge his legendary fame across the continent. Vinchen wields the legendary weapon, feeling the weight of the Adenka family's history in his hands and the deadly sharpness of its blade. Julian begins to spin in the air with joy, but Vinchen pretends not to be quite so happy to maintain his serious facade. The spirit comments that it wouldn't be good to be satisfied with only this level of achievement, as the future holds much greater things. Vinchen smiles faintly, agreeing that today's victories are just the first steps on a ladder leading to the top of the world. Julian admits that at first he was disappointed Vinchen wasn't a spirit king, but now he realizes how far they've already come. He declares that, although Vinchen is reckless and sometimes old-fashioned, he feels he can fully entrust his existence to his care. Vinchen calls for the servant to depart, and the man responds with renewed enthusiasm, ready to serve his lord on any new mission. Before leaving, Versa calls him for a final warning, her voice returning to the serious tone that indicates the danger isn't over. She praises his effort and planning, saying she's proud of how he transformed from a useless nobody into a born winner. Versa reminds him that he must enter the Crimson Fortress soon and asks if he already has a plan to subdue the Crimson Demon. The fortress emerges as an imposing castle atop a cliff, a place where only the best survive the brutal and cruel training. To be recognized as a complete warrior, Vinchen needs to win the tournament and defeat this terrifying creature that guards the fortress's secrets. Vinchen asks Julian how he should respond, and the spirit suggests he feign ignorance to avoid revealing too much about his knowledge. He says he's not yet sure, and Versa is surprised, having thought he would have planned even this detail with his sharp mind. She notices that his body must be suffering from the side effects of that strange sword technique, and Vinchen confirms he feels pain. Versa orders him to listen carefully, as the advice she's about to give could be the difference between life and death. The image of the Crimson Demon appears with its giant scythe, a creature that cannot be defeated with a single blow or simple strategy. She solemnly warns that Vinchen will die if he tries to face it in his current state and without adequate preparation for its multiple attacks. Julian wonders why his stepmother is giving advice now and concludes that she has finally started to like the new Vinchen Adenka. The spirit recalls his own tragic history, where his enemies threw him in prison and fabricated all historical records to discredit him. He notes that Versa could have used her eyes to destroy them, but didn't, proving she's no longer a hostile threat. Vinchen thanks her for the advice and assures her he won't disappoint her, bowing before making his way out of the royal hall. Versa is left alone, muttering that he left without asking about the creature's specific characteristics, acting like an impetuous and confident warrior. Her heart pounds at the young man's audacity, seeing in him the spark of a martial artist who knows no fear. The woman looks at the sky and wonders if Sarvana is witnessing the impressive growth of her biological son after so many years of silence. She declares that today, her son took a great step towards his ultimate destiny as a legendary swordmaster. The servant Sari appears singing while hanging clothes on the line, vowing to support the young master with all his strength and energy. Suddenly, he's hit on the head by an irritated maid who asks what kind of evil scheme he's plotting now. Sari complains about the unprovoked assault, while the maid suspects he only wants to cause trouble for the young man who has changed so much lately. She shouts his name and claims Sari is probably planning some mischief to test young Master Vinchen's patience. Sari indignantly points to the clothesline, asking if she doesn't see him working hard in the laundry to keep everything clean and organized in the mansion. The maid is surprised to see that he's actually being useful, something that rarely happened before Vinchen Adenka's radical transformation. He boasts that since the young lord changed for the better, he, as a direct servant, also decided to change his conduct and attitudes. Curious, she asks where the young master is now, wanting to know what he's doing after the tense encounter with the patriarch. Other servants comment that she's late with the news, as Vinchen has already left to carry out his next mysterious task in the library. Inside the library, Vinchen sits surrounded by hundreds of books, while Julian floats around, searching for crucial information about the distant past. The spirit shouts in frustration that he can't find what he's looking for, flipping through pages with supernatural speed and desperation in his search. Vinchen also collapses, asking why there are no detailed records about what happened exactly 500 years ago in the world. Julian notes that only that specific period of history seems to have been torn out or deliberately omitted from all the books in that immense room. Vinchen realizes that someone intentionally erased the facts, including the true details about his own original sword technique from the remote and legendary past. He decides he'll clear his name later and focuses on leveling up his skill to defeat the dreaded Crimson Demon in the fortress. The young man needs to find a training method that doesn't rely on image theory, as his body isn't ready for it yet. Julian observes Vinchen and remembers that he was the only one to call ancestor Arslan Adenka a child, which is utter blasphemy. The spirit gazes at his master with deep doubt and solemnly asks who he truly is behind that youthful face. Vinchen wonders if he should reveal that he is the great demon king Davin, but fears the shock would be too much for Julian's mind to bear. He decides it would be disrespectful to the body's original owner to reveal the truth now, as they both share the same destiny and tragedy. Vinchen asks Julian to listen calmly and not be startled, preparing to finally reveal a glimpse of his darkest, most guarded secret. The air around them begins to vibrate with an ancient energy, and Julian leans forward, eager to hear his master's true name. At the last second, Julian feels a terrible headache and asks him to repeat it, leaving the mystery in the air as the future remains uncertain. The sound is unbearable, as if destiny itself were blocking that forbidden information. Vinchen quickly stands up, shouting for the spirit to know if he's still conscious. Julian collapses to the ground, begging not to know anything more, while the young master breathes a sigh of relief. Suddenly, a different gleam among the piles of ancient books catches Vinchen's eye. He finds a mysterious volume called First Love at the Mill, hidden among battle manuals. Julian finds it strange for a romance novel to be there, as that library is exclusive to mana techniques. Vinchen instantly realizes the trick. Someone hid the world's true history in the form of fiction. The text describes steamy summer scenes, but between the lines lie secrets that could change everything. It's a brilliant strategy to deceive enemies and preserve the knowledge that was erased from records. He calls Julian to look closer, realizing the content goes far beyond romance. The story's protagonist doesn't use visualization, but possesses the power of love as a special trait. The book explains that traits don't induce flow. They are born from the movement of mana itself. Julian is shocked, as accumulating mana without using image theory is a suicidal path. Vinchen smiles upon finding the record of someone who survived this method and manifested powerful traits. Learning this is a deadly danger, but it's the only real clue they have to evolve. The young man wants to test the technique right now, completely ignoring the blonde spirit's warning shouts. Before they can begin, a female voice echoes through the corridor, urgently calling for the young master. It's Sari, the maid, who arrives in tears, asking if the rumors of his victory are true. Julian explains that she was away due to a family emergency and had always been loyal to the old Vinchen. Vinchen remembers the affection she had for him, even when everyone called him a complete loser. She kneels, emotional, thanking the heavens for seeing her master finally being recognized by all. Sari confesses that she feared he would be abandoned by the family after the Great Adenka Assembly. Vinchen feels awkward and asks Julian if he knows how to comfort a woman who is crying so much. He kneels beside her and promises that he will become a master worthy of pride. At the top of the stairs, a figure in red armor observes the scene with a heavy, serious gaze. Sari freezes upon realizing who it is, while Vinchen remains calm in the presence of Revan Adenka. Revan says he has something important to discuss, and the atmosphere in the courtyard instantly grows tense. They enter a private room, and the silence that follows is heavier than any scream. Sari stands between them, trembling with fear that another fight might break out between the nobles. Revan stares at the floor, unsure how to begin the conversation he came to have with his cousin. Julian floats nearby, impatient with the warrior's delay in speaking up. The maid tries to break the ice by offering sandwiches, but the tension continues to dominate the enclosed space. Suddenly, Revan's arm moves, and the room's atmosphere completely shifts to one of combat. Vinchen notices the movement, and his battle instincts go on high alert in a second. Revan says he has come to repay the debt he incurred during the Assembly of Swords tournament. He places his hand on the hilt of his weapon, and the sound of steel leaving its sheath echoes. Julian shouts a warning that the attack has begun, not expecting Revan to act so directly. The warrior in red advances furiously, repeating that he must repay what happened on that bitter day. Vinchen draws his Crimson Lotus in a perfect reflex, blocking the advance that could have been fatal. He notes that Revan now commands superior fencing techniques and that old tricks will not work. The young man orders Sari to leave the room immediately so she won't be caught in the crossfire. She refuses to leave, stating that she owes too much to the young master to simply flee and abandon him. Sari looks at Vinchen with determination, while Revan interrupts his attack with an unexpected gesture of respect. He recalls that Vinchen forgave his rudeness and even used the miracle stone to heal his wounds. Revan admits he was a coward for trying to fix his own arm at the cost of his father's sacrifice. He recovered everything he had lost, but feels he gave nothing in return for such generosity. The warrior affirms that he no longer wants to be the coward of that day, and makes a definitive decision. He says this is the best he can offer now and thrusts his sword into the ground. Before a surprised Vinchen, the proud Revan Adenka kneels and swears eternal loyalty to his cousin. Sari can't believe her eyes. One of the family's best warriors is kneeling at his feet. Julian is suspicious of his sincerity, but Vinchen realizes that the young man's character truly changed after his defeat. To surrender one's sword is to surrender one's life, and this gesture is sacred for a martial artist. Julian has a flash of genius and realizes that Revan's presence could be very useful. Vinchen accepts his loyalty, but warns that he will only uphold the pact as long as there is no betrayal between them. Revan remains with his head bowed, accepting any condition imposed by the one he now calls master. Vinchen touches his shoulder with the blade, sealing the oath that now binds their destinies. The warrior notices the Crimson Lotus sword and realizes that Vinchen already has the official approval of the Patriarch. He feels he made the right decision and is grateful that his oath was accepted without further hesitation. Sari remains in shock, unable to understand how things escalated to this level of respect. She comments that the old failed master now seems just a distant, very bad dream. Julian interrupts the emotional moment and suggests they begin the true experiment with the forbidden book. Meanwhile, in another part of the mansion, Patriarch Khan observes the situation from afar with caution. He is informed that Vinchen plans to enter the Crimson Fortress in the next official school year. Khan asks about the conquest of the Crimson Demon, an extremely dangerous rite of passage for any young person. His subordinate says that Vinchen didn't even ask for details about the monster, showing a confidence that borders on arrogance. Crimson demons can only be harmed by those possessing mana of level 3 or higher within their bodies. Khan falls into thoughtful silence, while the woman prepares to deliver the next piece of news about the boy. Vinchen now trains shirtless, revealing bright marks beginning to emerge on his defined chest. She reports that Revan Adenka is now living with him, serving as his right-hand man. Revan observes the energy flow, guiding Vinchen to complete the mana circuit one more time. Julian watches every detail with fear, begging his master to be extra careful with that insane technique. Vinchen returns to studying the secret manual, seeking to understand how to awaken the power hidden within. Revan asks if he truly wants to obtain the Dwarf King's blessing through the methods described in that book. He agrees to help, provided the content isn't merely a dangerous lie written by a madman. Revan warns that guiding the flow while Vinchen meditates is like entrusting one's very life to their partner. Vinchen smiles, reminding him that he himself swore loyalty, so there's no reason for distrust now. The sun begins to set as they commence the process that could destroy their bodies from within. Energy flows between the two youths, forging a spiritual connection no Adenka has ever attempted before. Time passes slowly as sweat drips and the pressure of mana intensifies in the enclosed room. Vinchen feels the heat of internal flames, striving to maintain control over the power threatening to erupt. Every breath is a battle against the physical pain attempting to shatter his iron concentration. Revan maintains absolute focus, feeling the vibration of Vinchen's energy oscillating between life and death. Night falls, and they remain motionless, defying the natural laws of pure martial energy manipulation. Julian floats around, nervous about the silence that precedes the storm about to break. Mana sparks begin to leap from Vinchen's skin, signaling that the accumulation is reaching its limit. The floor around them begins to crack under the weight of the invisible aura forming there. Vinchen grits his teeth, refusing to release the flow, even as his muscles scream for relief. He remembers his past life as the Demon King, and how he never obtained anything without risk. The manual states that one must discard all traditional theory to achieve true ancestral power. The light on Vinchen's chest shines with blinding intensity, illuminating the entire room with vibrant colors. Revan feels the pressure mount and reinforces his own mana to avoid being swallowed by the vortex. The air becomes so dense that gravity itself seems to warp around the two kneeling warriors. Julian closes his eyes, unable to watch what appears to be the tragic end of his young master. Suddenly, a crack echoes, and the energy stabilizes into a perfect, brilliant geometric pattern. Vinchen lets out a long sigh, feeling that he has finally crossed the threshold separating him from a new level. He opens his eyes, and they gleam with a red light overflowing with absolute cold authority. Revan takes a step back, startled by the sheer force of Vinchen's presence after the deadly trial. The young master looks at his own hands, feeling the power of a trait no one else possesses. But the effort took its toll, and exhaustion hits Vinchen like a collapsing mountain. He collapses forward, supported by Revan, who is still trying to process what he just witnessed. Julian quickly approaches, checking if Vinchen's mana had destroyed his internal organs in the process. Luckily, his body withstood the impact, but the scars of that training will be marked forever. Morning arrives, and news of their partial success begins to spread through the mansion's corridors. Vinchen wakes up and already wants to continue, but Julian demands he rest before trying again. He knows the path is still long, and the Crimson Demon will show no mercy. The young man sits on his bed, reflecting on the manual and the Dwarf King's secret. Suddenly, the door bursts open, and Grand Chamberlain Raelsa enters with a severe gaze. She demands an explanation for the destruction of the room and their deplorable state. Vinchen tries to invent that it was just an intense meditation, but Raelsa doesn't believe a word of it. Sari appears right behind her, scolding him for making her worry with these crazy and dangerous experiments. Revan observes the interaction and realizes that Vinchen's attitude towards the servants is unique and human. Raelsa sighs, deciding not to press the matter, but her face shows she carries superior orders. She says the Patriarch has sent an urgent message that will change his entire training schedule. Vinchen must complete his rite of passage and defeat the monster within a maximum of 1 month. Revan is indignant, as Vinchen's father has never imposed such a short time limit before. The young master smiles, understanding this means Khan finally has real expectations for his potential. Raelsa announces that, starting today, she will be Vinchen's official protector until the day of the test. She demands he gives his absolute best and does not fail the honor of the Adenka lineage. Julian calculates it would take 2 months to obtain the blessing, but now they only have 30 days. Vinchen knows he needs to accelerate everything, and Sari grabs him by the arm, begging him not to overdo it. She cries profusely, moved by the Herculean effort her master is making to conquer destiny. He promises to be careful, but something strange happens when he touches the maid's hand. Vinchen feels a powerful vibration emanating from her and wonders if it truly is pure mana. He realizes that Sari possesses a surprisingly large energy reserve for an ordinary and simple person. He asks her to leave so he can discuss the new battle plans with the loyal Revan. The door closes, and the atmosphere turns serious once more between the two young nobles and the spirit. 1 month isn't enough, and Vinchen decides to seek an even more aggressive shortcut to success. He begins to concentrate his mana again, feeling the heat rise in his internal energy core. Vinchen asks if that is the correct circuit as the marks on his chest glow like neon. Revan lets out a cry of surprise upon seeing that Vinchen managed to force the flow's completion by himself. The young master declares that he forcibly completed the path to quickly reach the manifestation phase. Revan realizes that true geniuses can do anything, even what seems impossible to others. Vinchen declares that he won't wait for the deadline to expire and will surpass all his father's expectations. They depart for an isolated clearing in the forest to make the final attempt to awaken the trait. The young man prepares to initiate the manifestation, concentrating every drop of mana he possesses within his body. Revan observes with a mixture of fear and admiration, ready to intervene if anything goes terribly wrong. Julian adjusts his glasses, analyzing the structure of the energy that begins to materialize in the cold air. Vinchen warns that there might be an explosion and suggests Revan move away for absolute safety now. Revan refuses to leave, stating he needs to witness his lord's success with his own eyes. Julian finds the warrior's loyalty impressive, while Vinchen takes a deep breath and begins the final ritual. He lets out a command shout, and mana explodes around him in a whirlwind of colors. His hands tremble with the effort to contain a force that belongs to the ancient gods of war. The glow becomes so intense that the entire forest seems to be bathed in midday light. Shockwaves spread, ripping leaves from trees and making the earth tremble beneath their feet. Julian senses something different in the air, a colossal presence beginning to form behind the master. The energy takes the form of a giant, majestic figure, wielding a hammer made of light. It's the Dwarf King himself, a divine manifestation that appears to bless this audacious and fearless warrior. The king's spirit stares at Vinchen with eyes of fire, evaluating if he is worthy of such power. Julian stutters in dread, asking if only magical beings like him can perceive that supreme deity. The Dwarf King roars, and the sound is like thunder echoing through the world's highest mountains. He raises his hammer of light, preparing to deliver a blow that will test Vinchen's resilience. Julian screams in despair as the divine weapon descends towards the defenseless young master on the ground. An explosion of golden light engulfs the clearing, blinding everything around for moments. Vinchen remains motionless, feeling the Dwarf King's energy merge with his own muscle fibers. His eyes glow with a new determination, reflecting the ancestral power he has just conquered. He whispers that he finally succeeded, feeling his body become more resilient than any known metal. He obtained the blessing of the Dwarf King, the ultimate defensive trait known as supreme body reinforcement. Revan is left speechless, seeing that the master accomplished in weeks what others would take years to achieve. The spirit of the deity slowly disappears, leaving behind an aura of unwavering strength and calm. Julian asks him to hurry home and rest, as the training almost scared him to death. Vinchen smiles, knowing that he now has the necessary foundation to face the terrible crimson demon in the fortress. He thanks Revan for his help, but the warrior tells him to save his thanks for later. Revan mentions he has one more favor to ask, but the atmosphere quickly returns to the mission's focus. It's time to depart for the monster's lair, and Vinchen dons his noble attire. He apologizes to Raelsa for the haste, but states he decided to surpass the deadline given by Khan. The Chamberlain is impressed to see him wanting to face the trial 2 weeks before the final deadline. She comments that she has protected 3 other family members through this rite, but the atmosphere is different this time. Raelsa remembers that no Adenka has ever failed this test, and the pressure on him is immense. As Sarvana's son, he cannot be the first to stain the family name with defeat. Vinchen assures her that nothing bad will happen, and that she doesn't need to worry about him. She repeats the warning about his lineage, emphasizing that the Adenka history demands perfection and true bravery. Raelsa implores him not to attempt the challenge with only blind, baseless courage. The young man maintains his confident smile, ready to show the world that he is the legitimate heir. The carriage begins to move, shaking as it passes through the mansion gates, heading towards danger. Inside the vehicle, Raelsa observes Vinchen in silence, trying to decipher the mystery behind this young master. Julian complains that having a guardian is useless, but understands she's also there to supervise. The spirit sighs, realizing that much has changed in 500 years, but the thirst for power remains the same. He floats anxiously, asking if the boy at least took time to study the Crimson Demon's attack patterns. Raelsa adjusts her glasses and coldly warns that 3-star mana is the minimum requirement to not be massacred in there. Vinchen keeps his gaze fixed on the horizon and tells them not to worry, while Julian wonders if Arslan planned every detail. The young master smiles arrogantly and declares, "The Crimson Demon was the first monster I ever hunted." He makes it clear he doesn't need to study something he already knows by heart, leaving the Chamberlain in uncomfortable silence. Raelsa admits she's not the most amusing person, but her commitment to duty is unshakable in the face of imminent danger. Vinchen questions why she tries so hard to help him, and she dryly replies that she is the official supervisor of this test. The boy retorts, mentioning her budget deviation and asking if she really thought she could hide something so obvious. He feels his strength is still insufficient and cannot shake off this dark thought as the carriage sways on the road. Raelsa suspects he intentionally gave her a weakness, just to have something under control during the mission. A heavy silence fills the vehicle as they stare at each other, measuring strengths in a silent psychological war. "If you don't want to talk, fine," Vinchen says, deciding his training is a closed subject for now. The loud whinny of the horse cuts through the air, announcing that the final destination has finally appeared before the group's eyes. They have finally arrived at the place where blood will be spilled to prove who deserves the Adenka legacy. Vinchen looks at the ruins and asks if that decrepit place is the demon's lair, being informed that it is the ancient temple. Raelsa explains that it is the memorial to the first patriarch Arslan, erected after he defeated one of the remnants of the demon Davin. Vinchen murmurs that Arslan and the monster being linked again cannot be just a simple coincidence of fate. The Chamberlain places her hand on her weapon's hilt, feeling the energy of the place begin to stir violently. She takes a deep breath and warns that she will prepare, emanating a combat aura that makes the air vibrate around her. The group advances over the silent stones, where every shadow seems to watch the young master's steps with hunger. The wind blows cold between the fallen columns, carrying the metallic scent of battles that happened centuries ago. Vinchen stops in the center of the courtyard, feeling the mana pressure increase as the enemy awakens from its deep slumber. Julian notices the mana barrier and realizes it was configured to allow only one monster through at a time. From the temple's darkness, a hooded figure slowly emerges, emanating a terror that would make any common warrior flee. It is the Crimson Demon, a nightmare creature wielding a giant scythe, ready to reap souls. The beast's red eyes glow intensely, fixed on the blue-haired young man who dares to challenge its territory. "Watch closely, Grand Chamberlain," Vinchen says, maintaining absolute calm as the creature prepares to pounce. He demands that she report exactly what she sees, proving once and for all his worth to the Adenka lineage. The demon lunges like lightning, but Vinchen remains motionless, waiting for the exact moment to begin his deadly dance. Julian shouts at him to dodge and use distance, but the master knows that retreating against that weapon is suicide. He plants his foot on the ground and understands that a long scythe is useless if the enemy is glued to the monster's body. "It's better to get close," he roars, invading the beast's vital space with a speed that defies logic. The demon's eyes widen as it sees the human throw himself towards danger, instead of trying to escape the blade's reach. Vinchen locks the enemy weapon's movement and warns, "Don't even think about swinging that scythe at me today." Metal collides with a deafening sound, sending sparks that illuminate the determined face of the young warrior. He explains that closing the distance is basic against large weapons, something that should be obvious to any fighter. Raelsa watches in shock, wondering how a 14-year-old boy can fight with such technical perfection. She realizes he moves like someone who has hunted this type of demon hundreds of times in the past. The Dwarf King's trait manifests, allowing Vinchen's young body to withstand the brutal impact without breaking. All of this is merely the necessary foundation for him to find the sword's path for his skill-based swordsmanship. The monster tries to retreat, but realizes too late that it's trapped in the combat rhythm imposed by the boy. Vinchen executes a fluid movement, dodging a desperate counterattack from the hooded beast by mere millimeters. "Now," he whispers, feeling mana flow through his circuits with a purity he had never felt before. He uses the perfect moment to increase the distance and prepare the final blow that will conclude the first phase. The Crimson Demon is aggressive, but remaining on the defensive the entire time created fatal openings in its guard. The beast fully exposes itself, and Vinchen sees the sword's path shine before his eyes like a guiding light. Against such an exposed opponent, striking the vital point becomes a simple task for someone with elite technique. He adjusts his stance, focusing all his energy into a single point of impact that promises to be devastating. Vinchen decides to use his special trait to reduce the recoil of the swordsmanship technique, ensuring the attack's precision. Skill-based swordsmanship combined with body reinforcement, the blow strikes the monster with the force of a meteor. The sound of impact tears through the air, and the Crimson Demon is thrown backward, its body beginning to disintegrate. The creature collapses, and a glowing red orb rolls across the floor, seemingly marking the end of the struggle. Vinchen partially sheathes his sword and turns to Raelsa, sporting a smile of absolute victory on his face. "Did you see that, Grand Chamberlain?" he asks, but her expression is one of pure terror and urgency. Raelsa is paralyzed, for she knows the dark secret the young master seems to have forgotten in the heat of battle. She stares at him with wide eyes, wondering if he truly doesn't know the monster's real nature. The red orb begins to vibrate intensely, sucking in the surrounding mana with a renewed thirst for blood. The reason why this beast cannot be defeated with a single blow reveals itself before everyone. The air grows heavy, and the temple's light flickers as the creature begins to reconstruct itself from the ashes. "It has 2 lives!" Raelsa screams, but the shadow behind Vinchen has already risen terrifyingly. Vinchen barely manages to turn as the overwhelming pressure of the revived enemy hits him with full force. The Chamberlain's explanation echoes too late, for the demon is now much faster and more lethal than before. The creature enters a berserker rage, doubling its physical strength to crush the audacious human. "Young master!" Raelsa screams, desperate to see Vinchen's life hanging by a mere thread. Vinchen merely observes the incoming attack, noting that even this detail is identical to what happened 500 years ago. He notices the monster's appearance has changed and wonders if these scourges have evolved during this long time. The beast's speed is terrifying, leaving only red streaks in the air as it strikes relentlessly. Vinchen feels the true danger when he realizes his escape route along the walls has been completely blocked by the monster. The demon roars with an inhuman sound, preparing an attack that promises to reduce everything around to dust. Vinchen grinds his teeth, feeling the air pressure crush his lungs as the scythe descends once more. He understands that the situation has spiraled out of control and that he needs a desperate plan to survive now. Julian panics, shouting that they need to change strategy before the master is killed. Not yet, Vinchen replies, focused on making the beast drop its guard for a definitive blow. The monster is accumulating mana for its supreme attack, believing it has already cornered its defenseless prey. Raelsa watches helplessly, knowing that her intervention would mean the boy's complete failure in the test. She clenches her fists so tightly her fingers lose color, begging that his future doesn't end there. Memories of Lady Sarvana flood her mind, bringing forth the image of a powerful and vibrant warrior. She remembers how Sarvana invited her on an adventure, even though Raelsa was just a frontier thief. Sarvana was pure light in a world of darkness, offering a helping hand to those who had nothing. Raelsa thought she was crazy, but that woman's courage attracted her like an irresistible magnet. "I'm Sarvana. Pleasure to meet you," she said with a smile Raelsa would never forget. Khan and Versa were also part of the group, accepting the new companion on that legendary journey of the Adenka. Raelsa felt that her life of raiding and solitude had finally come to an end alongside them. She was influenced by her master's audacity and decided to become the shield that would protect that legend. Memories of battles against giant ogres show the strength they possessed when fighting together. "I'm not the protagonist," Raelsa thought, but she was essential for Sarvana to shine. Sarvana always told her she was the best, keeping the flame of hope alive in her friend's heart. That woman had the rare gift of making people smile even in the midst of a bloody war. In Raelsa's hopeless life, Sarvana was the ray of sunshine that saved her from eternal darkness. But fate was cruel, and the day of farewell arrived with a torrential rain and immense sorrow. Raelsa clutched her master's lifeless body, feeling as if her own soul had been ripped away. A baby's cry shattered the silence of grief, revealing the child Sarvana had left behind. She swore to protect that child from the harsh life of the direct lineage, no matter the cost to herself. For 14 years, she watched Vinchen be called a loser and useless by everyone around him. Even his own sister humiliated him, treating him like trash unworthy of the family name. Vinchen accepted the insults with his head bowed, breaking the heart of the Chamberlain who expected more from him. But something changed recently, and the boy seems to have awakened an ancient and overwhelming power. Wilson, the servant, was impressed by the young master's new demeanor, seeing a true leader in him. Raelsa chided the servant's foolishness, but deep down, she too felt hope returning. Finally, "I'm starting to see light," she thinks. Seeing that the boy has been recognized by Patriarch Khan, she mentally implores him not to give up now, for the future of the Adenka family depends on him. Back in the present, the demon's scythe descends with blind fury, ready to end the lineage. Suddenly, a shadow streaks across the battlefield with speed that defies human eyes. Raelsa instantly recognizes the person who interfered in the combat so abruptly. Metal collides with a sound like thunder, and Revan Adenka emerges, blocking the beast's deadly attack. He smiles savagely and asks if the demon truly thought the master was alone. The Chamberlain is stunned, realizing that Revan had planned to help the young master from the very beginning. Vinchen seizes the opening and enters a state of deep meditation amidst the chaos of battle. "Are you insane?" Raelsa screams, knowing that even the slightest impact on the boy would now be fatal. But Vinchen entrusts his life to Revan, closing his eyes to focus every drop of mana into his sword. Revan confronts the monster and warns that he is the only barrier between the beast and its objective. The fight becomes personal, and the red-armored warrior shows why he is respected within the family. The demon roars in frustration, trying to reach the motionless boy, but Revan stops it with fury. He activates his crushing technique, using brute force to contain the berserker monster's advance. Revan realizes the beast is weaker than it appears and mocks the creature's lack of power. But the demon's scythe is powerful, and begins to create deep cracks in Revan's sword. He realizes too late that the monster was aiming for his blade to disarm him completely. Revan's sword shatters into 1,000 pieces, leaving him vulnerable before the beast's imminent attack. He curses his own failure, knowing he cannot protect Vinchen without a weapon in his hands. The monster prepares for the final blow, but Revan uses his own arms to seize the scythe. Blood pours, but he doesn't let go, screaming Vinchen's name in a final act of bravery. Vinchen opens his eyes, and the aura around him explodes, illuminating the entire temple with a divine light. He executes his masterful swordsmanship with a perfection that makes time seem to stop for a second. Vinchen's blade pierces the monster's core, destroying its second life with a single strike. The crimson demon explodes into fragments of mana, disappearing forever into the darkness of the ruins. The dust settles and silence returns, revealing the two victorious warriors at the center of the battlefield. Vinchen thanks Revan for his help, who merely laughs at the situation while trying to catch his breath. Revan admits he almost felt sorry for the monster for falling into the young master's deadly trap. Raelsa approaches and asks if that was his plan from the beginning of the temple expedition. She warns that the patriarch might not accept the result if he knows Revan helped him. Vinchen smiles enigmatically, revealing he manipulated the mana barrier to control the flow of enemies. He explains that the barrier only allowed one monster at a time, ensuring he would never be overwhelmed. His strategic intelligence surpassed even his physical strength, leaving the Chamberlain speechless. He proved his worth not just as a warrior, but as a leader who knows how to use his resources. The blue-haired boy walks out of the ruins, leaving the monster's body behind. Raelsa watches his back and sees Sarvana's shadow, sensing that the future has changed today. The journey to overcome the Samian family and his own father has just gained a new, epic chapter. Vinchen enters the carriage, keeping his gaze focused on the challenges that still lie ahead. Julian celebrates the victory, but warns that the next test at Crimson Fortress will be hell. Vinchen simply closes his eyes, ready to face anything fate throws his way. The legacy of the Adenkas now shines with a new light, and the world will soon know the name Vinchen. The legend of the boy who shattered steel has only just begun, and no one will be able to stop him now. Blood on the temple floor will dry, but the glory of that conquest will echo for entire generations. Vinchen feels the power of the Dwarf King pulsing in his veins, ready for the next level of strength. He is no longer just an heir, he is the destined one who will change the rules of this world. And Raelsa knows that, from today, she is no longer protecting a mere infant, but a king. The path to greatness is paved with the bones of enemies, and Vinchen has already begun building his. The carriage departs towards the sunset, carrying the hope of a lineage that was almost extinct. But in the shadows, Patriarch Khan's eyes continue to observe every move of his own son. The true war for succession is just beginning, and the stakes have never been higher than now. Vinchen knows that peace is merely a short interlude between the battles that will define his future. He is ready for the blood, ready for the pain, and ready to become the supreme legend. Crimson Fortress and the Crimson Demon was merely the first step of many more. The young blue-haired master takes a deep breath, feeling his mana stabilize in his now strengthened chest. He looks at his own hand and smiles, knowing that the power he wields is feared even by the gods. The world will tremble before him, and the Adenkas will finally reclaim the place that always belonged to them. There will be no mercy for those who stand in the way of the boy who decided to defy fate itself. Darkness may be deep, but Vinchen's light is capable of burning away any shadow that emerges. He is the master of skill-based swordsmanship and the lord of his own cruel and glorious destiny. The carriage disappears on the dusty road, leaving behind only the memory of an impossible and brutal victory. Vinchen looks at the horizon and knows that tomorrow will bring new enemies to be properly crushed. He will not stop until the Samian name is merely a footnote in the Empire's history. Julian floats beside him, proud to have chosen the right master for this blood-soaked journey. The legend of the gentle Steelbreaker is etched in time, and nothing can erase what was accomplished here. Every scar on Vinchen's body is a medal of honor that he carries with pride and determination. He is the legitimate heir, and the world will soon bow before his unyielding and divine strength. War is coming, and Vinchen Adenka is the commander who will lead everyone to glory or to death. He clenches his fist and feels the energy vibrate, ready for the next massacre fate has reserved. The ancient temple was left behind, but the seed of change was successfully planted in their minds. The future is uncertain, but Vinchen faces it with the gaze of one who has already won even before fighting. He is the Lord of Mana and the King of Swordsmanship, the boy who turned a boycott into total acclaim. Raelsa adjusts her posture, determined to follow the young master to the ends of hell if necessary. Her loyalty is absolute, just like the strength Vinchen demonstrated against the Berserker demon today. The journey has only just begun, and what comes next will make this combat seem like a mere child's play. Vinchen smiles into the darkness, sensing the presence of new challenges lurking around the next bend. He does not fear death, for he is the one who dictates who lives and who dies on the battlefield. The curtain closes on the Crimson Demon, while the stage opens for the rise of the true Adenka King. With the first demon dead, the flow of energy begins to violently fluctuate. A new hooded creature emerges from the shadows, ready to continue the massacre that the previous one began. Vinchen walks with an eerie calm and says that Revan's fight was merely to test his will. Now, the blue-haired master raises a glowing stone and declares, "I will prove my worth here and now." He bites the stone fiercely, shattering the crystal to release the energy contained within. An overwhelming purple aura explodes around Vinchen, making the air vibrate with pure mana pressure. Even with body reinforcement, he knows he only has enough breath to use skill-based swordsmanship twice. The reason for the previous meditation becomes clear. He needed total focus to control the performance of the Miracle Stone. Vinchen takes a deep breath, orders his body to endure the shock, and assumes his combat stance. Sword Strike is unleashed like a beam of light, cleaving through the temple's darkness. The energy strikes the monster head-on, disintegrating part of its physical form in an instant. Against an opponent with so many openings, Vinchen doesn't intend to waste a single second of attack. The demon roars in pain, but the young master's speed is something that defies the laws of physics. He activates his double-skill swordsmanship, unleashing a flurry of slashes that tear the creature apart. Raelsa watches in silence, shocked by the refined technique the boy just demonstrated. When the dust settles, she admits it was an incredible display for someone his age. Vinchen is exhausted, sweat pouring down his face as he struggles to catch his breath. He murmurs that without the meditation and the Miracle Stone, his body would have collapsed long before the end. Revan approaches and tells him to rest. For now, Raelsa will handle any remaining threats. Vinchen plunges his sword into the ground and swears he will never fall, no matter how heavy the burden. The Grand Chamberlain looks at the young lord with a respect she never thought she'd feel for him. But the peace lasts only a few seconds as the ground begins to tremble uncontrollably. A bluish light begins to emanate from the ruins, illuminating the entire courtyard of the ancient temple. Revan's eyes widen as he asks what's happening while the ground cracks apart. Vinchen and Julian look towards the center of the room, sensing that something far greater has just awakened. Raelsa shouts that it's a summoning circle, something that was never in the records of the Rite of Passage. Immense stones begin to float and coalesce in the air, forming a colossal and terrifying structure. Streaks of mana crackle between the rock blocks, fusing them into a monstrous, massive form. Raelsa's face pales as she realizes the level of threat that has just emerged before them. She identifies the creature. It's a relic guardian, an elite monster that protects ancient treasures. The stone giant roars, making the surrounding trees sway as if they were useless twigs. The energy is so dense that it's difficult even for the most experienced warriors to breathe properly. Raelsa adjusts her glasses, her stance instantly shifting into full battle mode. The guardian rises fully, a giant stone serpent that seems to have crawled out of a nightmare. The fact that a monster of this size was never discovered means it was created alongside the temple itself. Raelsa draws her sword and shouts, "I am Raelsa Beladion, servant of Adenka. Reveal your mission and show respect." The monster ignores the warning and charges, its eyes glowing with overwhelming murderous intent. She realizes the creature is acting on pure instinct and orders Revan to get Vinchen out of there immediately. Revan agrees and rushes to carry the exhausted young master's body away from the impact zone. Raelsa positions herself between her lords and the beast, preparing a technique the world rarely sees. She takes a deep breath and announces the beginning of the 7th chapter of the Beladion family's swordsmanship. An explosion of icy energy emanates from her, instantly freezing the ground around her feet. Revan looks back, jaw agape at the pressure the Chamberlain is exerting. He whispers her title with reverence, sensing that Adenka's true power is being revealed. Ice climbs up the guardian's legs, encasing the stone giant in a crystalline prison. "Blow, north wind," she commands, and a devastating blizzard swallows everything in its path. Fragments of ice fly like blades, piercing the monster's stone carapace with ruthless precision. Raelsa maintains absolute focus, channeling every drop of mana to sustain that epic-level attack. The sight is breathtaking, transforming the battlefield into a scene of eternal winter. Revan realizes he is witnessing a 7-star level master, a force capable of destroying armies. Vinchen, still in Revan's arms, murmurs that the fight isn't over yet and something is wrong. He points in a specific direction, his red eyes detecting a mana anomaly. The young master breaks free and warns that the real danger isn't the giant, but what it hides. Raelsa delivers a final blow that shatters the stone guardian's head into 1,000 pieces. Revan screams in desperation, asking what Vinchen is doing running towards the rubble. Vinchen slashes the air at nothing, leaving Raelsa confused about the reason for that move. She pauses for a second, wondering if he's trying to warn them about a hidden presence. That's when she sees it, a small stone creature with a red gem on its back trying to escape. The true guardian escaped the giant body and now advances dangerously towards the young lords. The little creature roars with a shrill sound, leaping with a speed no one expected to see. Raelsa activates her special characteristic, the Blessing of the Galaxy Walker, shining intensely. She uses the snow steps to cross the distance in the blink of an eye, almost invisible. Her silhouette passes like a black blur over the monster attempting a fatal ambush. With a single, precise movement, she smashes the creature's core against the forest floor. Raelsa asks if they are okay, while Revan sighs in relief that they are all alive. She confesses that she failed to notice the Guardian's true form because of the ancient structure of the place. Vinchen points forward and says, "Chamberlain, look over there. That's what the monster was protecting." Amidst the ice crystals, an ancient chest rests on an altar, untouched by time and war. The group approaches cautiously, sensing an ancestral energy emanating from the mysterious object. Raelsa carefully opens the lid, and the sound of creaking metal echoes throughout the silent temple. They exchange curious glances, wondering what kind of treasure could be guarded under such protection. She pulls out an immense bone and reveals it's the skeleton of a dragon, a relic of Patriarch Arslan. Revan freaks out with joy, knowing they've found an incredibly rare and priceless magical ingredient. Raelsa kneels before Vinchen and extends the bone, ordering the young lord to accept it. She states that, of all the Adenkas who passed through there, he was the only one worthy of finding it. Vinchen warns that this kind of spoil should go to the family, and she could get into trouble if they find out. He draws his sword with a determined look, indicating he has a plan to resolve this dilemma. With a dry, precise strike, the young master splits the legendary relic exactly in half. He smiles and says that now she will be his accomplice, sharing the burden of that forbidden discovery. Vinchen hands the half to Raelsa, stating he wouldn't have achieved anything without her help. She accepts the gift, bowing her head in sincere gratitude that comes from the bottom of her heart. The scene shifts to the Cemetery of Swords, a sacred place where the remains of warriors rest. The current Patriarch of Adenka observes the horizon, surrounded by blades plunged into the reddish earth. Raelsa introduces herself and reports that Vinchen completed the rite of passage with absolute success. She says that what she witnessed in the temple was far beyond a simple test, and she needed to tell him personally. The old patriarch offers a slight smile and says he can barely wait to hear the news. She recounts how Revan was influenced by Vinchen and how the boy defeated the Crimson Demon. His father scoffs, suggesting his son merely used cheap tricks due to lacking his own strength. Raelsa immediately retorts, revealing that he defeated a second demon alone, without anyone's help. She shows half of the dragon bone and explains that it was a gift left by their ancestor Arslan. The patriarch is incredulous to learn that Vinchen cut the dragon bone with his own sword. He stares at Raelsa and says she missed a crucial detail about the boy's strength. The old man extends his hand and gives a direct order. Try to break this bone right now. Raelsa is confused, but obeys her lord's command, preparing her maximum strength for the test. She strikes the bone with all her mana, creating a shockwave that kicks up dust from the ground. When the light dissipates, the dragon bone remains, without a single scratch on its surface. She asks for forgiveness from the ancestors and tries again, channeling even more devastating energy. The patriarch watches in silence as his best warrior strains herself to the utmost against the object. Sparks fly and the impact cracks the ground, yet the bone remains intact and indestructible. Raelsa stops, gasping, realizing that something impossible happened in those temple ruins. She admits she gave her all, and that it would take a legendary blacksmith to manage to break it. The patriarch looks to the sky and murmurs his son's name, realizing that Vinchen hides a unique power. An ancient sword gleams under the sunset, signaling that times of change have arrived. He orders Raelsa to take good care of Vinchen, for the family's future now depends on him. Back at the mansion, Wilson cries in despair upon seeing the state in which his young master returned. He shouts Vinchen's name, concerned by the wounds and visible exhaustion on the young man's face. Sari tries to calm him, reminding him that the Lord needs silence and absolute rest after the battle. Wilson asks if it's truly necessary to go to the Crimson Fortress, fearing for everyone's safety. He says the place is full of terrifying monsters and merciless martial artists. Sari mocks him, asking if ex-gangster Wilson is now scared of a few fantasy creatures. Vinchen observes the scene and asks Julian if he still hasn't noticed what's wrong there. He points at Sari and reveals he can sense a strange mana flow emanating from her body. Julian says he's never felt anything, but Vinchen claims he saw this very flow 500 years ago. He stares at the servant and asks for her family's true surname, seeking the truth. She confesses to being from the Hisley family, a ruined lineage that possessed the legendary magic body. Vinchen explains that the Hisleys studied the connection between mana and the body, unearthing forbidden secrets. He recalls an ancient master who said the magic body allowed mana to be infused directly into the bones. If this ability still exists, it could be the key to saving the celestial exoskeleton technique. He asks if any elders of her family remain, wanting to know why she ended up as a servant. Sari sadly recounts that her grandmother was the last one she knew, and she has already passed away. Vinchen apologizes for the sensitive topic, while she tries to mask her pain with a forced smile. Julian asks why such a powerful family would suddenly fall into utter ruin overnight. Vinchen suspects the Samians destroyed the Hisleys to conceal the existence of the celestial exoskeleton. Sari then drops a bombshell revelation. There was another person from the family she knew. She reveals that Vinchen's mother, Lady Sarvana, was also part of the Hisley lineage. The young man is in shock, as he was never told his own mother came from a magical family. They say the patriarch forbade her name from being spoken because he always grew sad upon hearing it. The old leader's face appears in the shadows, guarding secrets that could change the Empire's destiny. Wilson comments that Lady Sarvana was kind and hired people from ruined families without any prejudice. It was she who pulled Raelsa from the depths of despair and brought her into the Adenka household years ago. Vinchen realizes that Raelsa's loyalty isn't to the Adenka family, but rather to his late mother. Someone knocks at the room's door, interrupting the deep thoughts of the blue-haired young master. It's Raelsa, announcing that Lord Revan is preparing to depart from the estate at that very moment. Revan appears with his sword on his back, ready to forge his own path and grow stronger. He states that the work with the demon is done, and he cannot stand still while the world turns. The young man asks Vinchen for one last favor, showing he now fully trusts his judgment. He wants Vinchen to investigate the Hisley history from 500 years ago, seeking out the unmanipulated parts. They exchange a few casual words, sealing a friendship born amidst blood and fire. Vinchen accepts the request and tells him to leave everything in his hands while he's away. Revan promises that the next time they meet, he won't be a burden or a disgrace. They bid farewell with a firm handshake, symbolizing the unity between the two Adenka prodigies. Alone with Raelsa, Vinchen asks if her kindness is merely a way to repay her debt to his mother. He asks for a favor not as Sarvana's son, but as Vinchen Adenka, the martial artist. "Train me," he demands with an intense gaze, "until the day I depart for the Crimson Fortress." He wants to be pushed to the absolute limit, without the protections a common noble would normally receive. Raelsa closes her eyes and wonders if her loyalty to her former mistress can now be dedicated to her son. She remembers Sarvana's smile, an image that still warms the Grand Chamberlain's cold heart. She accepts the challenge and warns with a sinister smile, "I won't go easy on you, young master." Vinchen smiles back, saying that's precisely what he expects from her from now on. The training begins in an immense hall, surrounded by shelves full of training weapons. She explains that learning a characteristic without mental images requires a very specific mana circuit. Raelsa warns that she won't simply hand over the answers. He'll have to earn them through pain. She asks why he isn't using the blade he earned in the temple's rite of passage. The Black Moon is a powerful weapon, but she says he'll only wield it when he is truly worthy. He has a 5-month deadline, and the challenge is simple. If he can wound her once, she'll teach him the secret. She provokes him, telling him to try cutting her with that strange sword path he uses. Vinchen hesitates for a second, remembering that his attacks can cause permanent injuries. She approaches with terrifying speed and asks, "Do I look as weak as young Lord Revan?" The young man's eyes widen as he feels her murderous intent shoot towards him like an arrow. She attacks first, giving him no time to even process the incoming move. Vinchen tries to react, but Raelsa's technique is on a completely different level from anything he's ever seen. She declares that she knows the power of that swordsmanship well, and she won't give him a single chance to activate it. He barely avoids losing an eye to a grazing blow, feeling the true peril of death. She mentions they can call Father Dullen if things get too ugly during the sessions. With a glacial gaze behind her lenses, she reiterates that Mercy died the moment training began. A week passes, and the clash of steel echoes deep into the night under the full moon's glow. The pace is insane, with Vinchen being thrown from side to side as he desperately tries to find an opening. Every one of his movements is anticipated and punished with surgical precision by the Grand Chamberlain. She criticizes his preparation, telling him he's too slow for someone who aims to defy destiny. The impact of their blows carves craters into the training hall floor, a testament to the might of their struggle. After a brutal sequence, she decides to stop, warning him that more than 2 attacks would be suicide for him. Raelsa admits he's improving rapidly and says she'll call Sari and Wilson to assist. Vinchen looks at his sword, now riddled with cracks and on the verge of shattering into 1,000 pieces. He complains that he's already swapped weapons dozens of times in the past few days and needs something more durable. The scene cuts to a forge where a robust blacksmith pounds incandescent metal with brute force. Raelsa arrives and states it would be a tragedy if he continued supplying trash to Adenka's arsenal. The blacksmith wipes sweat from his face and reveals his name, Hansen, the man who will forge Vinchen's future. She taunts him, saying he lost more than just the title of master. The Grand Chamberlain reiterates that the family's arsenal demands absolute perfection. The blacksmith looks up and lets out a heavy sigh. He asks who the boy is and if he's Sarvana's new protege. Hansen wants to know why they've come to bother him in the middle of the night. Raelsa doesn't respond, merely extending a heavy sack. She empties dozens of broken blades, warning that they only lasted a single week. The dwarf analyzes the destroyed metal, finding the situation incredibly strange. He asks if they faced monsters or level 9 masters, but she denies it. Hansen questions if the blades clashed against an elite greatsword. She admits the training was against the young lord's Crimson Lotus. The blacksmith is shocked to learn that the nuisance Vinchen wields that relic. Vinchen appears, and Raelsa apologizes for the late-night visit. Hansen bellows that he has every right to see the sword he himself created. The boy is astonished to discover the master blacksmith's identity. Julian explains that Hansen is a former genius who fell from grace. He stopped forging weapons of war to focus on inventions that save lives. Vinchen smiles, saying the man is truly incredible. Julian emphasizes that Hansen prioritized protecting people over his own honor. The young lord bows respectfully and salutes the master blacksmith. Hansen is momentarily speechless, surprised by the formal address. He bursts into laughter, asking if the boy is trying to be a clown. Vinchen maintains his posture and assures him he's not mocking anyone. He firmly states that the master made the correct decision in his path. Hansen's laughter dies as he stares into the young man's resolute eyes. The blacksmith recalls voices from the past saying he would be ridiculed, but deep down, he always believed he was right to help the weak. He lets out a long sigh, seeing that someone finally understands him. Hansen realizes that the blood of the Adenkas truly runs strong in the boy. He admits that the rumors about Vinchen being useless are all false. The blacksmith extends his hand and demands to check the condition of the Crimson Lotus. He examines the blade's edge with an improvised magnifying glass. Hansen asks if he truly defeated a demon and trained with Raelsa using this. The old man's astonishment is visible with every inch analyzed. The blade shows no sign of damage, as if Vinchen cut through with his sheer strength alone. The blacksmith demands to witness the sword technique the boy employs. He challenges Vinchen not to use fatigue as an excuse to avoid the demonstration. Julian warns that he has already expended all his mana for today. Suddenly, Sari emerges from the shadows, calling out Hansen's name. She gives the blacksmith an epic scolding for making noise during bedtime. Vinchen discovers that Hansen has supported Sari and other orphans for years. In essence, they are like father and daughter by blood. The forge giant becomes docile, promising to return home the next day. Vinchen joins the conversation, promising to visit the workshop accompanied by Sari. The blacksmith departs, shouting for the boy not to forget his promise. Sari smiles, realizing the source of her friend's kind heart. The next morning, smoke from the forge already ascends to the sky. Vinchen concentrates his mana, preparing a devastating impact move. The air around him begins to vibrate with an absurd pressure. Sari and Hansen observe the demonstration in absolute silence. The blacksmith notes that the technique resembles the legends of the Hero King. He smiles, satisfied, and admits that Vinchen deserves to wield that sword. The boy asks if the demonstration was enough to convince him. Hansen says he's almost willing to forge something new for him. Vinchen's eyes widen at the master blacksmith's proposal, but Hansen warns that a crucial ingredient is missing for the masterpiece. Vinchen offers to purchase any material, no matter the cost. The old man laughs, saying money cannot buy what he needs. He reveals he needs a mastodon horn for balance. Vinchen and Julian exchange a knowing, silent glance. The boy calmly pulls the legendary item from his bag. The blacksmith stammers upon seeing the relic's gleam before his eyes. He shouts the mastodon horn's name as if witnessing a miracle. Vinchen requests silence, as only the patriarch and Raelsa know about this. Hansen declares that fate truly intended for them to meet. Vinchen suggests fusing the horn into the Crimson Lotus instead of forging a new one. He explains that the blade symbolizes the beginning of his father's career. The blacksmith agrees with the choice and requests 3 weeks for the work. Time passes, and Sari screams in horror as she gazes at the horizon. Chaos spreads as they rush towards the workshop. Vinchen realizes something terrible occurred during the forging. Hansen's workshop is being consumed by a violent inferno. Flames rise high, and the heat is palpable from meters away. Sari panics for the master blacksmith, but Vinchen holds her back. He assures her his blade will cut through the fire and the doors. Julian shouts that advancing now would be an act of utter recklessness. Vinchen ignores the warning and plunges directly into the burning inferno. He executes precise movements to disperse the intense heat. Boy sweeps the workshop's interior, searching for any sign of life. Julian points to the corner, shouting that the blacksmith is there. Hansen lies fallen on the ground, struggling to breathe amidst the debris. Vinchen tries to wake him, but the man is completely unconscious. Julian notices an abnormal glow emanating from the center of the room. The Crimson Lotus is emanating a light that seems to devour the very air. The mana from the dragon bone overflowed, causing the fiery explosion. Vinchen decides they must get Hansen out before everything collapses. He hoists the heavy blacksmith onto his shoulders. The young lord realizes the situation is far worse than he imagined. The main exit is blocked by flaming beams and boulders. Julian despairs, wondering what they can possibly do to avoid being burned alive. He asks if Vinchen knows any absolute defense techniques. The spirit warns that the dragon's flames won't stop on their own. Vinchen replies that he possesses a technique crafted exclusively for defense. He closes his eyes and delves into the memories of his ancient soul. He summons forth the swordsmanship of the Samian, the greatest rivals of his family. The first chapter of Gentle Steel Breaker is activated now. He murmurs that the gentle blade is capable of shattering steel. With slow, deliberate movements, he strikes at the approaching torrent of flames. The blade cleaves the air in a deadly, absolute silence. Julian watches the scene in utter shock at the power displayed. Spirit recognizes the enemy swordsmanship, questioning who Vinchen truly is. The boy ignores the question, focusing solely on maintaining the mana shield. They manage to traverse the inferno and finally breathe pure air. Hansen begins to cough, slowly regaining consciousness. Vinchen smiles and asks if the master blacksmith is well. The old man stares at the boy, asking how he knows the Samian technique. Vinchen jokes, saying he must be delirious from the smoke. Hansen decides to accept the excuse, believing it was merely a dream. He points to the center of the workshop and declares the sword finished. The blacksmith confesses he had never worked with dragon material before. Vinchen extends his hand toward the weapon floating amidst the ashes. As he touches the hilt, an overwhelming energy surges through his body. He feels the blade finally resonating with his very soul. The radiance of the enhanced weapon is unlike anything he has ever witnessed. Hansen asks if he is pleased with the final result of the work. Julian interrupts the moment, stating that something feels very strange. He questions if Patriarch Arslan wasn't aware of the risks of this mana. The spirit realizes the fire was a deliberate test for Vinchen. The boy immediately requests Hansen to forge a second sword. The blacksmith grumbles that he needs time to clean up all that mess. He states he no longer has any dragon bones to continue the service. Vinchen and Julian observe the destroyed workshop in silence. Raelsa suddenly appears, carrying a package wrapped in cloth. She hands over another dragon bone, leaving the blacksmith speechless. Hansen cries out in disbelief upon seeing another legendary-grade relic. She demands absolute silence, for this is a family secret. The blacksmith remarks that her loyalty to the young master is impressive. He accepts the challenge and promises to forge the perfect dragon sword. Raelsa walks through the gardens and admits she almost gave up on him. But witnessing Vinchen's maturity left her genuinely impressed. Vinchen approaches and apologizes for the delay in his return. He asks how he can repay the favor she granted him. Raelsa replies that she already received her payment 14 years ago. She says that seeing him prove his excellence is the greatest reward possible. The boy guarantees she'll be even happier with what's coming next. He reveals he's concocted a plan to defeat a 7-star master. Vinchen draws his sword and vows to defeat her right then and there. Raelsa unsheathes her blade and warns she'll show no mercy. The initial clash sends sparks flying throughout the training hall. Vinchen is thrown back, but withstands the impact with a smirk. He declares that the true combat has only just begun. The two move like blurs, exchanging blows at superhuman speed. Raelsa shouts that he's still far from achieving a true victory. The pressure of her mana begins to crack the floor beneath their feet. An explosion of energy freezes the air around the battlefield. Their swords cross at a deadly angle that defies gravity. Vinchen grinds his teeth, enduring the weight of her assault. Raelsa notices he blocked a blow imbued with 4 stars. To her astonishment, she realizes his sword suffered no damage. The boy seizes the opening and launches a ferocious counterattack. His movement flows naturally and lethally like never before. Raelsa feels his flow of power has completely shifted levels. She questions the true secret behind the new Crimson Lotus. Vinchen explains that the sword now absorbs all impact shock. It's the power of the Dwarf King's trait that Hansen infused into the metal. She acknowledges the blacksmith's hard work in the evolution of that weapon. Raelsa decides to ramp up the intensity to test the boy's limits. She vanishes from sight, using a divine movement technique. Vinchen's eyes widen as he loses track of his mentor. He feels her presence emerging from all sides simultaneously. The boy decides not to be fooled by speed and focuses on her mana. He shouts, "Here!" and launches a blind strike into the void. Raelsa appears behind him and whispers that he missed his mark. Vinchen smiles and admits the miss was intentional to lure her in. In a flash, he releases his sword and uses his bare hands. He anticipates her attacking his back and sets a trap. Raelsa is in shock that he detected her movements within a month. The young lord activates an explosive variation of a double attack. He strikes the balance point of her sword with surgical precision. The impact creates a shockwave that sweeps through the immense hall. She realizes he used the full force of his successive attacks. Raelsa's sword flies away, leaving her completely disarmed. Vinchen points his blade and tells her to retrieve her weapon from the floor. He states he won't accept a cheap victory against someone without a sword. Raelsa stares at him with an icy, profound gaze from behind her lenses. She calls his attitude arrogant and warns him the world is cruel. The mentor warns that his future enemies will show him no sympathy. The air around the mentor begins to freeze, and she commands him never to forget this warning. Vinchen grinds his teeth, admitting her aura is simply overwhelming. She tells him to prepare for what's coming now, for the counterattack will be real. The floor beneath her feet cracks as absolute cold takes over the entire training hall. In a move too fast for the eye to follow, the Grand Chamberlain lunges forward like a blue lightning bolt. But in the middle of her strike, she lets out a gasp of shock, realizing something is wrong. Vinchen appears like a phantom behind her and holds her with chilling calm. His touch is swift and precise, catching the master completely off guard. With a smirk, he says, "I wounded you," reminding her that there are still 4 months until the academy. Raelsa collapses to her knees, unable to comprehend how he managed to touch her even with her defensive technique. He explains that he didn't cut her body, but rather the mana surrounding her, using the Dwarf King's power. She wonders, incredulous, if it's truly possible for someone of his age to slice an opponent's mana. The mentor admits he always surpasses expectations, and the boy already demands his promised reward. She agrees with a nod and says she will finally reveal the secret of her blessing. The power comes from the Galaxy Walker, a flow of energy that defies natural laws. Blue mana sparks begin to dance between Raelsa's hands as she begins the lesson. Jaron observes from afar, floating, as the young lord sits to meditate and absorb the teaching. It's astonishing to think he mastered the path of mana flow in just 2 days of effort. Vinchen focuses all his will on the core of his chest, where the mark of the blessing begins to glow. The energy spins in a violent vortex, preparing his body for a radical level change. Jaron looks at the ceiling and jokes that he hopes the boy doesn't end up going through the roof with so much power. The glint in the blonde guide's eyes reveals that he knows he stands before a rising monster. A mystical silhouette emerges behind Vinchen, as if the very spirit of the walker is embracing him. Meanwhile, far away, the imposing Crimson Fortress rises over mountains covered in eternal snow. Inside the fortress, Dean Vargon complains to Director Herka that she's spacing out again. She tries to brush him off, claiming she's a warrior and holding pens is a waste of talent. Suddenly, she freezes upon reading Vinchen Adenka's name on the list and asks if he is the 7th son of the main family. Vargon adopts a dark gaze and says they need to nip the evil in the bud before the boy even enrolls. Unaware of his enemy's plans, Vinchen continues his mana training with insane intensity. The symbol on his chest now pulses with a divine light that illuminates the entire dark room. Jaron floats nervously, worried that the sheer scale of this mana will end up destroying everything around them. He realizes that the young man isn't just learning, he's rewriting his own limitations. The image of the Galaxy Goddess fully manifests, enveloping Vinchen in an embrace of pure energy. He lets out a heavy sigh, feeling his body temperature drop sharply as the technique stabilizes. Jaron cries out in alarm, not understanding the cold pressure that has taken over the environment. The boy explains that the blessing of the Galaxy Walker consists of only one definitive step. He shivers for a second with ice in his veins, but maintains absolute control over the power. Raelsa watches from afar as he vanishes from sight, without leaving a single trace in the snow. This is the legendary Frost Walk, a movement technique that turns the user into a ghost on the battlefield. Later, Vinchen studies maps and realizes that the Crimson Fortress is more a prison than an academy. He points to the exact location on the map, nestled in the mountains bordering the Samian territory. He remembers that ancient heroes, like Arslan, defended that place against the archdemon's followers. The young man believes he will find Arslan's will there, and perhaps another fragment of the dragon's skeleton. Jaron interrupts and says that the true treasure of that place isn't a bone, but something legendary. It's the celestial fruit, a medicine so powerful it is said to be capable of bringing the dead back to life. Rumors say the entire fortress was built solely to protect the tree that bears this fruit. The guide admits he wouldn't have believed these stories before, but their current situation leaves them no choice. The objective is now clear: obtain the fruit to heal the decaying skeleton and escape certain death. They only have 9 years of life left, and that time could be even shorter if they keep pushing themselves like this. Jaron gets excited and shouts that they will uncover the secrets of this fruit and claim it for themselves, no matter what. He notices Vinchen is distracted and asks what's on the young master's mind. The boy read that at the Crimson Fortress, students must fend for themselves, without any family money. Jaron explains that this rule exists to prevent nobles from buying their way to the top with bribes. Vinchen asks where they'll get money, and the spirit replies with a smile, saying he's already thought of everything. He reveals that he invested a fortune in a place called the Sixth Magic Tower to secure their future. If the Adenkas are masters of the sword, the Sixth Tower is the birthplace of the Empire's most elite mages. Jaron shows the papers and says the mage he invested in is named Varnelli Pagoda. He celebrates, realizing she just became the co-owner of the tower, guaranteeing a massive profit. But the mood darkens as he remembers that the entire investment turns to ash if the owner suddenly dies. At that very moment, within the tower, Varnelli is abruptly interrupted by a shadowy figure who draws a blade. Blood splatters across the room as the assassin mockingly asks if a tower master would really die so easily. Her lifeless body collapses to the floor, staining the very documents Jaron held so dear. The news spreads like wildfire. Varnelli Pagoda has died in a supposed explosion during one of her researches. Jaron is thrown into utter panic, trembling from head to toe as he realizes he's lost every single coin. He lets out a desperate scream for his money, while Vinchen asks if he shouldn't show respect for the dead first. The spirit retorts, declaring there's no time for mourning when they're on the verge of starvation within the fortress. The mage's will states that all her possessions and research go to her only living brother. That brother is none other than Vargon Pagoda, the stern dean who utterly despises Vinchen. Vargon gazes at the sky, wondering why his genius sister would leave everything to him, who had always been the family's disgrace. Vinchen decides that his first step upon arriving at the academy will be to investigate this Vargon fellow. Time flies, and only 4 months remain until the start of classes atop the icy mountain. The boy focuses on gathering information and strengthening his body as much as possible for what awaits him. 4 months later, the group finally arrives at the base of the mountains surrounding the Crimson Fortress. Raelsa stops and warns that for security reasons, they will have to continue the rest of the journey on foot. Vinchen accepts without complaint, carrying his determination and his new sword on his back. His mentor points the way, stating that the fortress director will personally come to guide them to the gate. The young man thanks her for everything she's done for him, and Raelsa simply smiles, saying it was nothing. She looks at him with a proud glint in her eyes, thinking her own mother would be happy to see his growth. With a final wish of luck, she bids him farewell and asks him to be extremely careful inside. Raelsa's carriage departs as Vinchen's footsteps echo in the soft snow of the mountainous path. At the top, Vargon informs Director Herka that the Adenka boy is almost at the main gate. Herka grumbles that being formal and guiding newcomers is a pain, until a magical crystal begins to glow. The warning is urgent. Monsters are invading the local residences around the fortress right now. The director leaps with joy, using the invasion as an excuse to escape the boring reception duty. She throws the responsibility of receiving the descendant of Adenka onto Vargon and jumps out the window without looking back. Vargon yells furiously as he watches the woman disappear on the horizon, as if she were off to a party. The guard asks what they should do with Vinchen, and the dean decides he will handle the matter himself. He walks with an icy gaze, determined to test the boy in a way he will never forget. Vargon descends the fortress stairs with an aura of authority that makes the guards tremble. The soldiers salute the dean, who dryly asks where the young master Adenka is. One of the guards points to the road below, where a solitary figure walks calmly. Vargon adjusts his vision and lets out a sound of surprise as he notices who is accompanying the boy. He recognizes Raelsa and wonders what the Grand Chamberlain is doing there as a bodyguard. The guard confirms it is indeed the legendary Raelsa, bearer of the Galaxy Walker's blessing. Vargon thinks the boy must truly be utterly useless to need someone so powerful to protect him. When asked if he'll lower the exam's difficulty, the dean replies with a cruel smile, no. He plans to eliminate Vinchen before he even enrolls, so as not to stain the fortress's name. Vargon activates an immense magic circle and announces that the illusory monster subjugation exam has begun. He reiterates to his men that he will test the boy personally and with all available force. The circle shines with blinding intensity, unleashing ancient mana that distorts reality. He commands the first test to begin now, summoning beasts that seem to come straight from hell. Vinchen and his companions stop mid-path, sensing the sudden shift in the air. Vinchen's companion points ahead, startled by the vision emerging before them. The Crimson Fortress gleams in the distance, but the path to it has been suddenly blocked. Everyone goes on guard as a deafening roar makes the entire mountains tremble. The creature lets out a war cry that freezes the blood of anyone who isn't a warrior. A gigantic paw with razor-sharp claws strikes the ground, kicking up a cloud of snow. Vinchen realizes the examination has begun earlier than expected and prepares for battle. He unsheaths his sword, declaring it the perfect moment to test the fruits of his training with Raelsa. With a defiant gaze, he accepts the fortress's brutal welcome and charges into the fray. The young man advances with astonishing speed, leaving a trail of stardust in his wake. The beast fully reveals itself. It is the most feared predator in the entire mountainous region. The legendary blue-eyed white tiger emerges from the shadows, ready to devour any intruder. Vinchen's companions tremble with dread, but the boy maintains absolute calm in the face of death. He orders Sari and Wilson to run for the fortress without looking back the moment he creates an opening. Vinchen provokes the beast, calling it a kitty, and begins to move, drawing its full attention. He knows this type of monster reacts to anything that moves faster than itself. The tiger roars and pounces, but Vinchen smiles, realizing his plan to lure the beast has worked. However, in the midst of combat, he senses that something isn't quite right with the animal. Though it appears to be a real tiger, the creature lacks the scent of blood or the presence of a living being. Even so, he decides that changes nothing, and he will defeat the creature regardless. The young man takes a deep breath and channels his mana, feeling power surge through every fiber of his muscles. The clash between blade and claws creates a shockwave that pushes back the surrounding snow. To his surprise, another tiger materializes from nowhere, flanking his position in a coordinated attack. Vinchen activates body reinforcement, and his legs glow with an intense yellow energy. He leaps between attacks, moving as if gravity were nothing more than a suggestion to him. His friends watch from afar, terrified, as more beasts begin to emerge from all sides. They count 18 tigers in total surrounding the boy in a deadly trap. The guide warns that it's impossible to defeat so many monsters with only 2 attacks, but Vinchen realizes the trick. He notes that white tigers don't hunt in packs, and the lack of scent confirms they are merely illusions. Jaron asks if they truly are illusion spells, and the boy confirms as he analyzes the battlefield. Vargon, observing from above, keeps his hands on the magic circle, controlling every movement of the beasts. He realizes the boy has seen through the ruse, but believes nothing will change the final outcome. The dean explains that it's a high-level magic, and that the illusions are controlled by a human intelligence. He silently challenges the useless 7th son to try and survive this storm of claws. Jaron suggests enduring until the mage's mana runs out, but Vinchen states they are using an assembly element. He explains it's a method to copy and paste spells, conserving mana and multiplying the danger. The solution is simple. Find the original tiger serving as the template and destroy it for all the others to vanish. Since a human is controlling it, Vinchen knows the original will be protected in some strategic location. He gazes at the top of the cliff and spots an immobile tiger, realizing that's the main element. The boy activates the walker's blessing, and the illusory tiger roars, sensing the shift in energy. The air around Vinchen begins to crystallize, and the creature atop the cliff finally moves. He dashes like a blue blur, using Frostwalk to traverse the battlefield in a single second. Vargon goes into total shock, recognizing Raelsa's characteristic technique being wielded by the boy. In the blink of an eye, Vinchen appears directly in front of the tiger, acting as the magic's anchor. With an icy gaze, he confirms he has finally found what he was looking for. He prepares the final blow against the assembly element, as the other tigers begin to dissipate. Vargon tries to react, to leave no opening, but it is already too late to stop the boy's advance. Vinchen commands his sword to strike, unleashing an explosion of mana that illuminates the entire ravine. His Crimson Lotus sword absorbs the properties of ice and shines with a destructive light. He executes a variation of the absolute cut, infused with the divine blessing he received from his mentor. The blow severs space itself, striking directly at the magical connection that kept the illusions alive. The word walker echoes mentally as the boy's power obliterates everything in its path. Vargon feels the impact of the spell's breakage and lets out a groan of pain as he loses control of his mana. Vinchen sends the illusions flying away from the path, clearing the way with a single movement. The phantom tigers dissolve into the air like smoke, leaving only the mountain's silence behind. Snow calmly resumes falling over the now utterly empty battlefield. The Dean realizes that Vinchen not only defeated the illusions, but destroyed the magic circuit itself. He admits that young Adenka possesses an understanding of magic that far transcends a mere swordsman. Vinchen wipes his blade clean and mockingly asks if the fortress examiners were satisfied with the show. Vargon admits to his subordinate that his magic was completely obliterated by a 15-year-old boy. He orders the gates to be opened immediately to receive the young master with due honors. Vinchen walks toward the fortress, wondering if it's common to encounter mages of that caliber around here. His friends, Wilson and Sari, celebrate the victory, while Jaron confirms their plan is unfolding perfectly. The immense metal gates of the Crimson Fortress begin to creak and slowly open. Jaron explains that Varnelli's brother is the one in charge here, and they need to get close to him. A line of soldiers pays absolute respect as Vinchen crosses the entrance of the elite academy. Vargon formally introduces himself as the Dean and extends an official welcome to the new prodigy cadet. Vinchen returns the greeting with an enigmatic smile, knowing that the game of power has just begun. Jaron explains that the sponsorship system will be the key for them to acquire the funds they desperately need. He states that the objective now is to earn as many points as possible to impress the bigwigs. With a greedy glint in his eye, the spirit swears he will reclaim every single coin he lost in that magical tower.